That's been a warning for many weeks now, this concern that this will bring in other actors in the region because Iran has many proxies, not just Hamas in Gaza, but Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen. We can see, of course, the Houthis have been taking pot shots with rockets and drones at shipping in the Red Sea.
Blinken arrived in Israel after saying he had secured commitments from 4 Arab nations and Turkey to help in rebuilding Gaza after the war, something they'd been reluctant to promise before a stop in fighting. 2023 was officially the hottest year on record for Earth. Global temperatures started blowing past records mid-year. They did not slow down. June was the warmest June ever recorded, then July, and then so on through December. The New York Times reports that on average last year, temperatures were 1.48 degrees Celsius higher than in the second half of the 19th century. That's more than 2.25 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. A series of storms making its way across the U.S. Some people in the northern areas seeing heavy snow already. Others are seeing heavy rain and hail. More on this, Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn.
Very strong storm system moving out of the central United States, producing a lot of weather across the country. We have snow on the backside of the system. Tornado watches are in effect for southern parts of Georgia and the northern portion of the Florida Panhandle. We've already had some storms produce hail up to the size of baseballs in southern Alabama.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn says the other problem with this storm is it's bringing very strong, very windy conditions. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Lisa.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Lisa, you flagged a story here coming out of the Consumer Electronics Show, but it's not about electronics, is it?
No, it's about cars, which usually they're taking over kind of the CEO show there. So one of the problems with EVs is tire duration, right? So EVs, they weigh more than their internal combustion counterparts because they have those heavier battery packs. Now, even according to Kelley Blue Book, the average EV tire typically needs to be replaced about after 30,000 to 40,000 miles. Yes, it's crazy. So Goodyear, they introduced, it's called the Electric Drive 2. It was at CES. They say it's going to extend the tire mileage of electric vehicles. The first iteration of that tire came with about a 60,000-mile warranty. They're going to be commercially available in North America starting in May. Now, for who? For what cars, right? So it's produced for 17 different sizes. It's made for the Tesla Model Y, the Ford Mustang Mach-E, and the Chevy Bolt. They already have like 2 other EV-specific offerings. One actually is for electric buses, but this one is for cars. But who knew they wore out so fast?
Yeah, I mean, just another reason that I have no interest in electric cars right now. The company's new EV product is expected to feature materials including soybean oil used in the tire's construction, as well as sustainably sourced natural rubber, as well as high-quality rice husk ash silica.
So if you break down, you could eat the tire.
You could eat the tire. I mean, yeah, it's just amazing. So, but it kind of goes back to, you know, to see this announcement from a Goodyear tire and rubber company be announced at CES. I was just mentioning to Lisa, when I first started going to CES about 30 years ago, it really was about electronic gadgets, TVs, all that kind of stuff. Now it's basically an auto show. And it's by far the biggest auto show of the year. And, oh, yeah, there's some electronics around it as well. But it's just because the car these days is really featuring so much electronics that's where the auto companies tend to show it off. So they take up, I would say, more than half the space out there at CES. It's just amazing what a big presence they have out there at CES. So got to be there. It was a lot of fun back in the day. S&P 500 off 0.5%. NASDAQ off about 0.4%. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
Why were the economists so wrong? What are the economists getting wrong?
Isn't this a slam dunk time to buy U.S. Treasuries?
Soft landing, hard landing, no landing. I don't know.
True. What the heck does that mean?
I don't know.
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
We're going to be in an environment with higher rates for longer.
The 5-day in-office work week is effectively dead.
It's definitely a good sign that we're not ready to land this economy just yet.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to check in with Tim Craighead. He is the senior European strategist with Bloomberg Intelligence. Bloomberg Intelligence came out with their annual publication of 50 companies to watch globally. He's going to highlight a couple of the cool ones for us today. Our C-suite conversation, Kevin Sayer, CEO at Dexcom, joins from the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference to talk about medical technology and the outlook for his company as well. Then we're going to talk stocks with Dave Hardin, founder and president of Summit Global Investments. So all that's coming up in this hour, and we kick it off with Mr. John Tucker.
All right, in the S&P 500, Paul and Lisa, 10 of the 11 major industry groups are lower. The only group higher, defensive, that's healthcare. And then, of course, you had Hewlett Packard Enterprise, the biggest individual laggard, reportedly buying Juniper Networks. On the other side of the screen, Juniper Networks, the leading stock in the index, up about 22%. Weighing on tech, Samsung posting its sixth straight quarter of declining operating profit. Meantime, Ben Laidler of eToro expects a different kind of stock rally for this year.
We pulled forward huge returns into the fourth quarter. I'm still very bullish for 2024, but I do think it's going to be very different to the rally we saw last year. I think it'll be a bit smaller. I think it'll be back-ended. I think it'll be more cyclical, and I think it'll be more global.
Right now, the S&P 500 pairing some of the earlier losses down about 0.4%, 21 points lower, 47.42 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 272 points. The NASDAQ 100, 54 points lower. That's a decline of about 0.3%. Investors waiting for the next inflation report, CPI out Thursday. Meantime, Bloomberg Intelligence writing that inflation remains a primary threat to stocks in 2024 with potential for negative effects on equity performance. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa and Paul.
John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Lisa Mateo, Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Also streaming live on YouTube, so you can check us out. YouTube.com, search Bloomberg Radio. As John was just reporting, sell-off in the marketplace today with the S&P off about 0.4%. Let's look under the hood, see where some of the stock stories are. We do that with Bloomberg's equities reporter, Jess Menton. Jess, what are you looking at?
Well, if you look at the S&P 500, even though there's a decline today, it's still just about 1% away from that all-time high that it reached just a little over 2 years ago there, just to put
I like that you keep reminding us that, because that's context.
It's important. Yeah. It's context yes. there. So, yeah, we've had a little bit of a bumpy start to the year, but we came off of 9 consecutive weeks of gains, and things were down, yes, last week, but people were still, at home after the holidays and things like that. So I feel like this is more of the first real week of trading that we're seeing here. But when you're looking at some of the industry groups in the S&P 500, energy, materials, those are the two that are leading declines here. So the energy sector down about 1.8% today. You look over at materials, though, down about 1.3% too. So sort of these value corners of the market. Obviously, there's a correlation there, too, when you do look at the declines that we've seen lately in oil prices as well. And, of course, I know that you brought up Match Group earlier when you and I were talking, so the owner of Tinder and other dating platforms, but that actually stock is looking up today if you want to see sort of a bright spot there with this stock. So MTCH is the ticker symbol on this, up about 5.3%, so on pace for its best day since mid-November there, but that was a Wall Street Journal report that did say that Elliott Investment Management had built a stake of about $1 billion in the company.
All right, we've already established that neither Lisa nor me swipe. Doing the swiping thing. We go the old-fashioned way, meeting people in bars. John Tucker, I'm probably going to put him on that list as well. But are you a swiper?
I'm not on the apps.
Not on the apps.
No,
okay.
No, I'm good.
What's the process by which I'm at a loss? You swipe?
Swipe right.
Swipe
if
right.
You,
so
if
you see
like
somebody's Lisa is all over this. And she's married, but whatever.
Swipe right if you like, and left if you're going to pass.
If you're going to pass on him, yeah.
Okay.
I know, my son's on it, that's why.
Based solely on the photograph?
The photograph, but there's a little bio. There's some things. I don't know, I get snapshots.
That is so shallow.
I know. This is why I'm not on them.
That is just awful.
I'm good. I'm fine over here.
But if you want to invest in it, Match is the way to go.
Correct.
Historically. Okay, I got it. All right, but that stock's down. Very good. We established that. What else you got for us?
So, looking at some of these under individual names, I know that JT did bring up Juniper Networks. I'll do an update on this. JNPR is the ticker symbol on this. So you are looking at this stock up over 20%. So actually, the last time that it had gained at least 20% in one day was all the way back in January of 2004. So we'll see how these gains hold. But right now, it's on pace for its best day since January 16th 14th of 2004. So this did come after the Wall Street Journal also did report that the company was in advanced talks to be sold to Hewlett-Packard Enterprise for about $13 billion. And you and I were speaking about this earlier, Paul, especially when you think about back when HP split into two separate companies, HP Inc. and then Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. This was actually back in 2015. So really HP Inc. is the one that focuses on PCs, whereas when you think about Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, it's more of the servers type business here. So when you do look at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise stock, though, this morning, HP is the ticker symbol on this. It's down a little bit more than 8% right now. So on pace for its worst day since November of 2021. So some context around that. Morgan Stanley said any potential deal would be better for Juniper than HPE, but Piper Sandler did say that a combination of the two companies would make some sense there. So that's why you're seeing a little bit of a divergence there with those two stock prices.
Anything you're working on in your equities team here? Because I mean, you're always publishing stuff.
So John Tucker actually brought up some of the Bloomberg intelligence data earlier. So I wanted to add some more context on this. So there actually is a pretty tight correlation when you are looking at the S&P 500's price to earnings multiple compared when you're looking at the 3-month figures, the futures rather, when you are looking at the secured overnight financing rate. So that, when you are speaking to Gina Martin Adams or her team, Jill Wolfe or Michael Casper over at Bloomberg Intelligence, this to them sort of signals still the debate about what would be the macro factor to be the catalyst for stocks this year, whether it's inflation still, or if we're talking about economic growth, because you are seeing that decelerate a bit, but still, I mean, the Atlanta Fed, actually GDP, they just put it out a few minutes ago. The latest growth figure is about 2.2% for the fourth quarter. So it still remains over 2%. We're still waiting for a lot of the December data to come in for the fourth quarter. So we'll have obviously that reading on CPI coming up on Thursday, and then of course retail sales in the coming weeks. So that's going to be adjusted, but over 2%. I mean, that's still strong growth, down from close to 5% in third quarter. So you see decelerating a bit, but that's not necessarily bad growth when you are looking at GDP there.
Because I mean, as recently as, I don't know, a month ago, I'd heard, a number with a one handle on it for the
It was for the Atlanta Fed, and so in early November it was. So you've seen that come up a bit once we've gotten past the November data, especially when you're thinking about the consumer data related to the holidays and retail sales. So we'll see what that still looks like. But overall, I mean, slow down from the third quarter, but still some strong growth there, Paul.
Yep, very good. All right, Jess Menton, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Jess Menton covers all the equities for Bloomberg News here in Europe. We want to go across the pond, talk to our good friend Tim Craighead. He's a director of research over there for Bloomberg Intelligence. He's also the senior European strategist with Bloomberg Intelligence. He joins us via Zoom from Queen Victoria Street, which is the awesome London headquarters of Bloomberg LP over there. It's just an awesome building, so if you're ever in the city of London, go check it out. Hey, Tim, thanks so much for joining us. I know you guys at BI put out your annual kind of 50 stocks to watch here. I'd love to kind of get from you kind of maybe some themes that are on this list, or maybe a cool name or two. How did you guys approach 2024?
So, Paul, this is one of our favorite little projects we do each year. If you think, November, December, it's all about making all these big outlooks over markets and industries and whatnot. And this is where we can gravitate into naming names where we see interesting ideas. And it's a group of 50 companies that are part of our broader list of focus ideas. And as a reminder, this is a group of companies where we have a really strong fundamental view that we think is differentiated from the market, and where there's catalysts that we think will happen to turn the market towards our view. And all of these have catalysts coming up in 2024. And it's pretty well split. You've got about half that are from the Americas. You've got 30% from Europe, Middle East, Africa, and you've got about 20% from Asia. So that's kind of the broad scope.
And AI seems to be a really big part of that list. Is that a sign of what's to come?
Yeah, I tell you, AI is interesting because when we were pulling this together, my knee jerk is, gee, AI had a lot of hype in 2023. Is this at the peak of that classical Gartner hype cycle? But what we're seeing might have been hype in 23, but actual execution in 24 is the bet. And in combination, we think that we're in the midst of what will be a building IT spending cycle. And so if you bring these two together, then the likes of an Alphabet or an Accenture that are at the heart of either creating AI or implementing it are a big deal. Or then if you go into, say, an SAP with their enterprise systems, they create the data that the large language models are going to use. And then you get into applications. I mean, I don't know if either one of you all happen to use Intuit with TurboTax, but they're implementing AI to make tax prep easier for individuals. And Match, anybody for Tinder or Hinge? They're using AI. They're using AI to better select photos. So there's a lot of different applications here.
Yeah, well, Match is one of the names on this list, and it stocks up big today on the LA Investment News. So there's a winner there. Tim, any themes kind of jump out at you as you looked across what the Bloomberg Intelligence analysts put up there on their list? And again, you can find this list in Bloomberg Business Week. It's in the edition of Bloomberg Business Week. You can also find it on the Terminal BI Go.
Yeah, so I think another big piece to this is what's going on from the standpoint of central banks. This was big last year, but it was big because central banks were still tightening, and it was higher for longer, and there was the financials riding the wave of rising interest rates. This year, it's kind of the opposite. We, as is the market, are looking for a central bank pivot, whether it's here in Europe or in the U.S. We think that puts pressure on financials margins. We have a broad negative focus idea on European banks. Barclays is a specific one that we have on this list. AXA, one of the big insurance companies, is also here for similar reasons, and there's new insurance policy regulation that's being put in place that makes them more sensitive to interest rate changes. You've also got, though, the flip side. UK home builders have been under a lot of pressure with higher interest rates, and we think that may start to turn. And a company like Persimmon is a case in point. So both sides of the interest rate argument.
What about other factors? Like, of course, we have the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. Did you take that into consideration, too, when you were making that list?
Yeah, we did. General Dynamics is on the list. And, part of this is, the unfortunate element of rearmament across Europe and, ongoing defense spending, as well as what's going on with those guys from a commercial aircraft with Gulfstream. So, that's definitely a point of reference. Another element of this that I think is quite notable is there certainly are always opportunities with management change and restructuring stories. And, there are a couple of big ones. Union Pacific has a new CEO that is coming in who's got a history of what's called precision transports. Really honing in customer service and times and this, that, and the other really improves efficiency for railroads. And, our analyst there, thinks that is not yet fully understood. Vivendi over here is a big restructuring story where they're looking to break the company apart into 3 component pieces and potentially list them. So that sort of management change, restructuring, corporate change is another element across a number of the companies.
So, I see our good friend Herman Chan, who covers the regional banks here in the U.S., he put Truist on this list. And I like that because, these regional banks really got crushed. And it felt like a lot of the quality regional banks were kind of thrown out with, kind of everybody else. And so maybe it's time to start trying to find some of the good ones that got thrown out.
Yeah, and Paul, it's interesting because notwithstanding the prospect for falling interest rates, which generally is a negative for the banks, Truist is looking to take specific action. You can sort of put this into the corporate specific category of raising capital through asset sale that can bolster their capital and make them all the better positioned. HSBC over here is another case in point like that. Massive bank, big European exposure, big China exposure, but we think the problems are well covered with provisions, and what isn't fully understood is how they continue to expand dividends and buybacks. So there's certainly some positive financials notwithstanding the backdrop.
Tim, what about mergers and acquisitions? I mean, yesterday was a big day for pharma mergers. We had a ton of those. How did that play a role into what you were considering when you thought about these companies? Yeah,
there are a couple here from an M&A vantage point. Number one, SABIC, which is one of the largest chemical companies in the world. They're selling their steel business and really focusing attention in on the petrochemical side of things, which we think plays into a good cycle, as we progress through 2024. ExxonMobil is on the list. Now, you know that they made a huge acquisition in the Permian Basin late last year, and we think that sets the stage for improved returns where they've lagged some of their bigger integrated oil peers. So there are a couple of those M&A stories that certainly play in.
Hey, Tim, your other hat, in addition to putting these lists together, is kind of just strategist for the European market. In 30 seconds, what's the European equities call for 2024?
Tale of two halves, Paul. I know that's a cliche in ways, but with the rally that we had into the end of the year and looking into what we think is going to be a pretty challenging fourth quarter reporting period coming up and a slowing economic backdrop, we think it's a tough first half. I do think at some point that gets recalibrated. Maybe there is a bit of give up in the markets from these elevated levels that sets a stage for the second half, looking into 2025 with recovery that could be quite interesting.
All right, Tim, thanks so much for joining us. And Tim Craighead is the strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence over in London, and they are out, BI is out with their annual list of 50 companies to watch in 2024, from Alphabet and BYD to Eli Lilly and Vivendi. Keep an eye on these global stocks this year. You can find that in Bloomberg Business Week magazine. You can go online to Bloomberg Business Week and catch it there, or you can find it on the terminal BI Go. Some really interesting names there. And if you want to do more work on any individual name, you can go to BI Go, and there's complete company analysis, research reports on all the companies and industries there. So that's kind of how you navigate through that if you're looking for some good ideas this year. S&P 500 off about a third of 1%. NASDAQ off about 0.2%. The Russell is off 1.2%. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some company news right now with Steve Rappaport.
Paul, United Airlines and Alaska Airlines are inspecting door bolts on Boeing MAX Jet 9s that were grounded after a door blew off the fuselage on an Alaska Airlines flight last week. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle reports.
Alaska Airlines and United have found 737 MAX 9 planes, other planes that have been grounded, because of course the FAA over the weekend did ground 171 of those planes. Missing bolts, there was a missing washer in India. On this particular plane, it was basically brand new, 2 months old. There was also a pressurization fail light that had lit up 3 times.
Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle reporting. EU antitrust regulators have concerns about Microsoft's partnership with OpenAI. Bloomberg's Samuel Stolten reports.
The European Commission is taking the preliminary step of examining whether Microsoft's investments into OpenAI constitute what is called a relevant merger situation, and therefore a further investigation from the EU's antitrust enforcers. And this really follows a step that the UK's antitrust watchdog made in December, when it announced that it would ask stakeholders, rivals, other companies in the AI world what it thinks about this particular investment package.
Bloomberg's Samuel Stolten reporting from Brussels. Shares of Microsoft currently down less than 0.25%. And Ford is recalling some 2016 to 2018 Focus models and 2018 to 2022 EcoSport vehicles. The oil pump drive belt or drive belt tensioner may fail, resulting in a loss of engine oil pressure, which could cause a crash. Those are the company stories we're following this hour. I'm Steve Rappaport, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The S&P 500 is lower, but pairing some of the earlier losses, you now have 2 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500. They are higher right now, being led by healthcare and communication services. The biggest loser right now continues to be the energy sector. Tech shares, they're coming under pressure after Samsung posted its 6th straight quarter of declining operating profit. And then Juniper Network shares are rallying after a report that Hewlett-Packard Enterprise in advanced talks to buy the business. Investors also have some Fed speak to consider today. Michael Barr, the central bank's vice chair for supervision, taking part in a discussion that starts at noon Eastern time. S&P 500 right now 15 points lower. That is down about 0.3%. We're at 4748 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 235, and the Nasdaq 100 right now down just 26 points. That's a decline of about 0.2%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa and Paul.
John Tucker, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Lisa Mateo, Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. And we're streaming live on YouTube. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Radio. If you're a healthcare company, if you're a healthcare investor, you're in San Francisco this week, because that's where the J.P. Morgan Healthcare Conference is. It's where they all get together. That's the big one. And joining us today for our C-suite discussion, Kevin Sayer. He's the CEO of Dexcom. Dexcom is a NASDAQ-listed company. DXCM is a ticker to load into your Bloomberg terminal. It's about a $50 billion market cap company. Stock's up about 18% on a trailing 12-month basis. The company reported some preliminary results here. Let's start right there, Kevin. Thanks so much for joining us. I know you're out in San Francisco schmoozing with your investors and bankers and all that kind of good stuff. Talk to us about your business, Dexcom. What are the results you released today and your guidance for next year?
Well, we had a fantastic year in 2023. Our revenue growth rate was 24% to over $3.61 billion. I said from the podium yesterday, it took us 19 years to get to an annual revenue number of $1 billion, which I announced in 2019. And yesterday, I announced $1 billion fourth quarter.
Wow.
And so it was a great day for us. On top of that, our patient base grew 35%, active patient base to 2.3 million users by the end of the year, which shows a tremendous amount of scale and operating efficiency on our part to serve that many more people. Operating leverage, 200 basis points improvement on the operating margin side. At the same time, opening a flagship manufacturing facility in Malaysia, giving us capacity to really build everything we want to in the future. So we had a tremendous year of accomplishment last year. Then our guidance for 24, revenue increased 16 to 21%, a range of $4.15 to $4.35 billion, continued improvement on the operating leverage side. And also just a commitment, we will continue to invest in our business on the R&D and the technical side as we see a number of advances coming for our products next year, and commercially to take advantage of the opportunity that we have both domestically and internationally. So we had a very bullish day yesterday.
Yeah, Kevin, I understand. When I first learned about continuous glucose monitors, I didn't know anything about them. Now I see them everywhere. When I'm on the beach, it seems like everybody's got them. Talk to us about that market. Bloomberg Intelligence forecast the market for insulin-intensive patients in developed countries may reach $10 billion by 2024, representing nearly 20% annual revenue growth. So talk to us about the continuous glucose monitor market and your position in that market.
Well, we are the pioneer in that market. Every innovation on those devices you see has literally been driven by Dexcom, taking the data directly to a phone, displaying it on a smartwatch, integrating it with algorithms to drive automated insulin delivery, all comes from us. And if you think about somebody on intensive insulin, taking shots or wearing an insulin pump, what our technology gives them is a continual picture of what's going on in their bodies. In the past, what people had to do, and I don't know if you've ever done this, they had to stick their finger and look at a blood drop, and they'd get one data point and try and figure out what's going on in their bodies. We give people trends. We give them alerts if they're going too low or too high. We really give them the ability to manage that condition on the insulin use side. One of the reasons you're seeing all these continuous glucose monitors, however, isn't just that. And we announced a product yesterday that's going to be geared for people with diabetes not on insulin, but to give them the same clear picture of their health as well, because it can be so useful in determining the effect of nutrition, activity, and other things that go on in your life. So this technology does have tremendous health benefit, primarily today for insulin users, and that's where we are, and we will always be committed to that group. But we see in the future continuous glucose monitoring is a key component of metabolic health going forward. We're very excited.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Kevin, because my husband, he's the finger pricker. He has to do the finger pricking all the time, but he's type 2. So that's why this is interesting, this new glucose sensor that you're talking about. Now, what's your take on GLP-1s? They've really been sparking out there. How is that going to affect your business, your industry?
They are tremendous drugs. There's no question about this. But we think our continuous glucose monitoring technology goes hand in hand with GLP-1s. And in fact, we've shown data that where physicians, particularly for people with diabetes, are prescribing GLP-1s more, they're also putting more people on continuous glucose monitors. And the clinical results of the therapies combined show a higher reduction in A1C for those who have both technologies. If you're on a GLP-1 and you're using continuous glucose monitoring, what you see is kind of like looking into the healthcare mirror. You see exactly what the effect of this drug and your changed habits are on your body, and you can manage accordingly. So we've seen tremendous work with the therapies together, and we believe we definitely fit in this health and wellness future, and particularly with those with type 2 diabetes on these drugs. I think it's a great combination.
Kevin, for your product and for the GLP world just in general, as you guys figure out a way to kind of coexist there, as you're just explaining, who pays for all this stuff? Could you explain to me the insurance aspect of your business?
Absolutely. With respect to people on insulin, we are the most covered continuous glucose monitoring product in the country, and we have the lowest out-of-pocket cost for individuals of any continuous glucose monitor. So we are broadly covered in insurance, Medicare, the Medicaid programs. We worked very hard to secure coverage for those who use our product and to keep those copays as low as possible for them. On the type 2 diabetes side, we now have coverage for those on basal insulin and some who experience hypoglycemia. There are a few plans that cover people with type 2 diabetes that aren't on insulin, and we're pushing to guide more of that coverage. In all fairness, we're working also to provide clinical evidence to get coverage for that population as well. But this is a broadly covered product, available in pharmacies for most people with commercial insurance, and there are certainly very mature distribution channels for people to get it outside of that. Very, very well covered.
And Kevin, where do you see the technology going from here? I mean, you mentioned tech, and like AI comes to mind, all the time with me, but where do you see this technology growing from where you just talked about?
There are so many experiences we can create on the software side. For example, we announced yesterday that we're taking the technology direct to watch as an application. So, and while it sounds simple to people on the outside, it's not. But now somebody, for example, who goes on a run doesn't have to take their phone with them. They can see that data directly on their watch. We're incorporating activity data into our software app here in the first quarter, so you can see your steps or sleep or whatever it is you get from the fitness monitor that you're wearing. Now take that a step further. What happens when we figure out how to correlate that activity data with your glucose values and possibly another variable of the insulin that you've taken if you're an insulin user, so we can give you a better picture of what might happen to you later in the day? And I think for us, we believe we can derive a lot on the A front from the data that we already have, but we also think over time we have to incorporate other variables into this and really enable people to paint a better picture of their health, which really goes along with our new mission statement. We see this as such a growing field that we changed our mission statement from a diabetes management related one to empowering people to control health. And that's where we see this going. We think glucose can be part of numerous healthcare applications in the future.
Hey, Kevin, I'm looking at the Wall Street forecast, and most of the streets kind of got you at high teens to 20% revenue growth, which is really solid. Is that growth in the industry? Is that you taking share? How do you think about your growth going forward?
It's both. Our category continues to grow as continuous glucose monitoring becomes more and more accepted around the world. And we have every intention of taking share over the course of the year as well. Our technology, it's the most accurate sensor there is. We have the most insurance coverage, and the experience is fantastic. So we have every intention of doing both.
30 seconds left, Kevin. What do you do with all your free cash flow? I see it growing.
We are continuing to invest in our future. As I said, we built out a factory in Malaysia. We have one plan for Europe as well, and continued growth and expansion in the U.S. We will provide returns to our shareholders. We've had a couple of share buybacks, and if that looks like the right thing to do, we'll do it. And finally, we'll start looking at other activities, other capabilities, or companies we might want to work with or acquire over time. So those would be
connection lost.
All right, very good. That's what I like to hear. Kevin Sayer, he's the CEO of Dexcom, a healthcare medical device company. Think about those patches that monitor the glucose for a lot of folks. So a really cool technology helping a lot of people. The symbol for the stock, which is what I'm interested in, is DXCM. You can put that into your Bloomberg terminal. Again, the stock's up about 18% on a trailing 12-month basis there, so solid results there. S&P 500 off about 0.3% right here. NASDAQ off about 0.1%, so it's pairing some of those losses from earlier. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. Amy Morris has got World and National News.
Thank you, Paul. With Donald Trump present, federal appeals court judges in Washington expressed deep skepticism that the former president is immune from prosecution on charges that he plotted to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Judge Florence Pan.
So in your view, could a president sell pardons or sell military secrets? Those are official acts, right? It's an official act to grant a pardon. It's an official act to communicate with a foreign government. And such a president would not be subject to criminal prosecution?
Trump returned to the federal courthouse for his appeal of charges against him. The three-judge panel questioned whether they had jurisdiction to consider the appeal at this point in the case, raising the prospect that his effort could be dismissed. There was a secret meeting last month with Ukraine, the U.S., and other allies. Sources say Ukraine, its group of 7 allies, and a small group of global South countries met to try to rally support for Kyiv's conditions for holding peace talks with Russia. The meeting of national security advisors took place December 16th in Saudi Arabia. The White House is standing by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin even after he waited days to tell official Washington that he's been in the hospital since New Year's Day. Lawmakers across the aisle demanding answers, some Republicans calling on Austin to step down. Terry Haynes is the founder of Pangea Policy.
Fundamentally, his duty is to resign, and I think fundamentally the duty is among those of White House staff that are involved in this sort of chain of command and tracking people to stand down as well.
Now, the White House has already said if Austin hands in his resignation, they will not accept it. Terry Haynes of Pangea Policy telling Bloomberg Surveillance Austin's absence raises questions of competence around President Biden's cabinet. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Looks like we're pairing some of the earlier losses. And let me start with Treasuries, the benchmark, the 10-year fluctuating above 4%, yet oil also climbing. So that's tamping down on some of the risk sentiment. Hewlett-Packard, biggest individual laggard as it, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, biggest individual laggard as it reportedly is buying Juniper Networks on the other side of the screen. Juniper leading the individual stocks in the S&P 500, up over 20%. And then weighing on tech, Samsung posting its sixth straight quarter of declining operating profit. Investors waiting for the next inflation report. We're going to get the consumer price index. That's out on Thursday. In the meantime, Berenberg chief economist Holger Schmieding weighing in on U.S. economic growth.
Probably have a soft landing, but still a landing in the U.S. economy. And while growth is decelerating for cyclical reasons, it's difficult to see a rise in productivity because companies will hold on to their workers for a little longer.
Meantime, Bloomberg Intelligence writing today, inflation remains a primary threat to stocks this year, with the potential for negative effects on the equity performance. S&P 500 down 15 points. That's a decline of 0.3%. We're at 4748 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 223 points lower. And the NASDAQ 100 down 25 points. That's a decline of 0.2%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Lisa is with me here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. We are streaming live on YouTube as well. So we're coming at you, video, audio, the whole 9 yards. Our next guest, Dave Hardin, founder, president of Summit Global Investments. Dave, I think you and I are going to have a problem here. It says on my notes, you guys are based in Bountiful, Utah?
Yeah, you have to get out here, Paul. The snow is perfect for you right now.
I'm coming out there in March. I'm bringing the boys from Summit, New Jersey. We'll be coming out there, so make sure the snow's all set and we'll be ready to go. We love Utah, so looking forward to it. Dave, what are you doing with this market here? I mean, I think the last 10 weeks or so of 2023 probably took a lot of people by surprise. They're very happy when they open their 401k, but probably took them by surprise here with the performance. What do you make of what we did experience there in 23, and kind of how's that set us up for 24?
Well, I think one of the things for sure, call it as the Santa Claus rally, if you will, but the Fed really helped the markets a lot, right? They provided a lot of liquidity, and they've done great. So pumping this up, this quantitative, I would call it the understudy of quantitative easing, but we're seeing that right now. Inflation is coming down, it's playing into the Fed's hands, and that's really driven markets. I mean, micro-cap stocks up 28%, Russell 2 up 25% into the year end. So what it sets us up is this breather. I think that the economic data doesn't quite support the return data. And so that's why I think the market's taking a breather here. It needs to catch up economically. And I think we're going to see that next week in the CPI. My vision is that, and Glenn, it's my crystal ball, but my opinion is we'll probably have inflation come down a little bit. And so there's still this great need in the market to manage your risk-based assets in these equities. I think it's very important at this time.
Now, you just touched upon this. Do the markets appear to be ahead of those economic indicators?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, think about this. A quarter return at 25%. We'll take 100% annualized return any day of the week, but we know that's not going to last. So, yes, it got ahead of it. It got ahead of itself. And I think that's why it's going to take a breather here a little bit. But overall, looking into the first quarter, listen, the Fed's still behind the markets. Interest rates are still coming down, literally looking to come down, and cuts are starting to be anticipated, lower inflation. So right now, it's hard to say, besides geopolitical things that happen, why the market doesn't continue at least sideways, if not a little bit higher into this Q1.
Dave, I know at your firm, you try to deliver low volatility U.S. equity returns. How do you do that?
Well, it's a combination of a number of things. A lot of hard work, right. A lot of great people, and in reality, doing things that others won't do. And that's looking at correlations of stocks and equities, within stocks and bonds, looking at correlations, looking at the individual companies, specifically looking for high quality earnings and looking for things that they're going to do well regardless of the markets. So I think it's really key. And also the last thing I would say is we have to understand our clients better than anybody else. The more we understand our clients and what they want, the better we're able to deliver on those wants.
All right, Dave, let's get into it. What are you recommending to buy? What do you like?
I think that's a great question. I still think you have to stick with some high quality earnings and get in the middle of the current. Right now, I think the current's still in technology overall. And so I would definitely, one of our top picks would be Microsoft. High quality earnings here. Margins are great. They're in the middle of the AI trend. There has a lot of synergies with, I think, picking up this purchase of Activision Blizzard yet to be realized. So one I would say is Microsoft.
Dave, how concerned are you about valuations here? Again, we had that big run in the markets in that fourth quarter, but not necessarily a big commensurate rise in earnings. So how do you feel about valuation in this market right now?
And it really depends on your objectives, right? If you're looking at retirement in 20 years, I'm not concerned. It's time to get in and not worry about it and really move on. If you're looking at retiring in March, I'm concerned. It's time to take some stuff off the table, right? Because we've had a great run. So it really depends on the situation of the investor. But overall, from a firm's perspective, there is some volatility that's yet to be had. Let's face it, the VIX has been so low, it's almost concerning, right? There's no fear in the market whatsoever. So I think you do have to be a little bit concerned on a trade basis, a temporary basis, with the expensiveness or the valuations currently.
And what's your take on crypto? I'm looking at Bitcoin right now at just over 46,000. I mean, Bitcoin ETF hopefuls, they're just waiting for the SEC to get some approvals, possibly tomorrow. What's your take on crypto? Where do you stand?
Well, this goes back to a couple different things. First, I get the momentum and the pressure that's out there for the SEC. They're under a tremendous load right now to try to approve one of these, starting with the first one tomorrow. For sure. I don't want to be in their shoes. But I always tell investors, if you understand it, then move forward. If you don't understand it, don't move forward. Most individuals and most companies actually don't understand the Bitcoin situation. They don't understand the technology. They don't understand how to get into it. And so for most investors, this is really not for them. The other thing about all of Bitcoin, it's very hard to regulate. And I think that's one of the things that the SEC is dealing with is how do we approve something we have a very difficult time regulating. And so that's something that if you can manipulate those markets, it becomes very nervous for the average investor. Maybe not for the risk. And for those that really want to gamble, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and we even had a tweet out from SEC Chair Gensler yesterday, basically saying invest at your own risk, so not necessarily a ringing endorsement. Dave, what are some of the sectors here that you like? I mean, I'm sure like a lot of people, I missed that Magnificent Seven, trade last year. Do I chase that type of thing, or do I, maybe try to find some of the names that maybe haven't performed and offer better value?
I think it's a good question. I think that there is some value still in those individual companies, like I mentioned Microsoft earlier. I think in general, though, you have to let that go and look at the stream and what's really working and get in the middle of what's working. And so sector-wise, interest rates right now are poised to come down this year. And if we do have more of a market, you're going to see more quantitative easing than quantitative tightening. So either way, we're looking for more of accommodating Fed in the sense of inflation is going down. That's going to help the housing market and the mortgage market. It's going to have some volatility because we don't really know that crystal ball perfectly, but in a macro sense is by December next year, our interest rate's going to be lower. I think the consensus is yes. And that's very helpful. So I think in names like, for example, Lennar, LEN, ticker symbol, the 2024 rate cuts are there, reasonable price right now. Trend is throughout the economy is better for housing and the housing shortage in general. That would be an individual name in a sector that I would like.
All right, Dave, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate getting some of your thoughts. Dave Hardin, he's the founder and president, Summit Global Investments, located in Bountiful, Utah, right outside Salt Lake. I'll be hanging out there for a nice skiing run in March. Looking forward to that. They always have great snow, great folks out there. So always enjoy myself out there in Utah. Looking at these markets here, S&P 500 off about 0.25%. The Dow's off 0.5%, about 210 points on the Dow Jones Industrials. NASDAQ off about 1/10 of 1%. So again, pairing some of those losses from earlier this morning. Yields come in slightly. 10-year Treasury, 4.00%. Been holding that level most of the trading session today. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some company news right now with Stephen.
Paul, how about some good news for Boeing? The aircraft maker posted a record number of net orders last month. That announcement comes after the FAA grounded Boeing 737 MAX 9 jets following a fuselage blowout mid-flight. Bloomberg's Katrina Nicholas reports.
They've had several quality control issues, and this is just another one. You know, listeners probably remember the Boeing 737 MAX crashes that happened about 5 years ago, tragic incidences, lots of deaths in Indonesia and Ethiopia. And, you know, Boeing was really starting to recover from that. That MAX 737, real workhorse of the skies, was grounded for many years. It's now back in all of the markets around the world, and now they have this.
Bloomberg's Katrina Nicholas reports investigators have yet to locate the 4 bolts that failed to keep a door panel in place. United and Alaska Airlines have found loose bolts on some of their MAX 9s. Sticking with airlines, there's another labor agreement in the industry. Let's get details from Bloomberg's Andrew O'Day.
15,000 passenger service workers at American Airlines, including those who work at ticket counters and gates, airport lounge staff, and reservation agents, have approved a 5-year contract. It provides average initial wage increases of 20%. It also includes benefits such as enhanced 401k employer contributions and increased profit sharing.
That's Bloomberg's Andrew O'Day reporting. With COVID vaccine demand and revenue drying up, Pfizer is turning to cancer treatments as a source for growth. The firm is looking to the recent acquisition of Seagen and its targeted cancer drugs to help restore its leadership position in the drug industry. Those are the company stories we're following this hour. I'm Steve Rappaport, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
A little bit of red and green on the screen here. S&P off 0.2%, but the NASDAQ now a little bit positive, up 8 points for the NASDAQ. Looking at the yield picture, we got yields a smidge lower, 4.01% on your 10-year. WTI crude oil up 2.7% here, so moving a little bit higher, $72.67. And Bitcoin now down about 0.4%, 46,900, so below that 47,000 number. Again, waiting on that SEC ruling on a potential for a spot Bitcoin ETF. With our news down in Washington, D.C., let's go to Amy Marsh.
Right, thank you, Paul. Former President Trump returned to Washington today. His lawyers arguing that he is immune from prosecution on charges that he plotted to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Assistant Special Counsel for the Department of Justice, James Pierce, told the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit that nobody's above the law.
Separation of powers principles, constitutional text, history, precedent, and other immunity doctrines all point to the conclusion that a former president enjoys no immunity from criminal prosecution.
The hearing's over now, and either side has the right to appeal. Neither the full D.C. court nor the Supreme Court is required to take the case, so this court's ruling, whenever it comes, could be the final word on the matter. The Department of Labor is set to release a final rule that would make it harder for companies to classify workers as independent contractors. Major gig economy players like Uber and Lyft are following this very closely. It could also have sweeping impacts across construction, trucking, and healthcare. This year will be hot. So hot, some experts are already predicting it may beat 2023 as the hottest year in recorded history. Climate change is, of course, primarily responsible, but what makes scientists even more secure in their prediction for 2024 is El Nino, defined by hotter waters in the tropical Pacific, which also heats the air above the water. It's going to be a hot one. A series of storms making its way across the U.S. Speaking of hot, some people in northern areas seeing heavy snow. Others are seeing heavy rain and hail. Details with Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn.
Very strong storm system moving out of the central United States, producing a lot of weather across the country. We have snow on the backside of the system. Tornado watches are in effect for southern parts of Georgia and the northern portion of the Florida Panhandle. We've already had some storms produce hail up to the size of baseballs in southern Alabama.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn says the other problem with this storm is it's bringing very strong windy conditions. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Lisa.
All right, Amy Marsh, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Lisa Mateo, Paul Sweeney, live with you here. Here's a story, Lisa, that I didn't even know was a thing, and it is apparently. General Motors sold fewer vehicles in China than in the U.S. for the first time since 2009 as consumers in the world's biggest auto market increasingly opt for domestic brands. So GM's deliveries dropped around 9% to 2.1 million cars last year in China, whereas U.S. sales jumped 14% to 2.59 million, according to company statements. The car maker has slumped in China since 2017 when it delivered 4.04 million vehicles, roughly double its total last year. Like, I didn't even know that GM sold that many cars in China. I didn't even know it was even a thing. So GM isn't alone in losing ground. China's electric car manufacturers have ascended in their home market at the expense of international companies, including Volkswagen, whose signature brand lost the #1 spot to BYD's namesake last year. So that changing China marketplace there.
Yeah, and China too, very competitive. They've been doing a lot with the slashing the prices for the EVs. That has been a big thing over there. So yeah, I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy.
But I think for General Motors, I mean, you know, a lot of the U.S. companies, they pulled out of Europe because it was just too competitive, couldn't make the profits there. But they, up until, you know, just now, it seems like they've had a big presence in China. But again, China's really supporting the EV transition. And the local manufacturers are doing a better job. So that's interesting there that it's not just GM, but it's everybody else as well.
Sure.
Good growth market, but not as good as it used to be. Again, GM unit sales down 9% in China. Looking at these markets again, kind of mixed here, a little red, little green. The S&P is pretty much unchanged. Same thing for the NASDAQ, a little bit to the positive, up about 0.1%. Bitcoin off a little bit, 46,900 for Bitcoin. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
Why were the economists so wrong? What are the economists getting wrong?
Isn't this a slam dunk time to buy U.S. Treasuries?
Soft landing, hard landing, no landing. I don't know.
True. What the heck does that mean?
I don't know.
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
We're going to be in an environment with higher rates for longer.
The 5-day in-office work week is effectively dead.
It's definitely a good sign that we're not ready to land this economy just yet.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to check in with Philip Colmar, managing partner and global strategist at MRB Partners, to get his market call. Then George Ferguson, senior aerospace analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, is going to join us to give us the latest on what's going on at Boeing. Never a good thing when a part of the fuselage blows out at 16,000 feet. So we'll get the latest there, particularly since I'm going to fly a 737-900 on Friday, supposedly. And then really cool, coming up a discussion, Bloomberg Technology is going to interview Qualcomm CEO Cristiano Amon from the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. We'll bring that simulcast TV radio live to you at approximately 12:45 Wall Street time. Right now, let's kick this hour off with Mr. Charlie Powell.
Hi, thank you very much, Paul Sweeney. You mentioned Qualcomm ahead of our interview. We've got Qualcomm shares up by about 0.6%. And Boeing ahead of your flight Friday. We've got Boeing down now by 0.8%. The Dow lower, down 0.5% right now, lower by 186 points. S&P 500 index down 7, down 0.2%. NASDAQ up 8 points right now, reversing earlier losses, up by about 0.1%. Stocks fell after a tech-led bounce as Treasury 10-year yields fluctuated above 4%. Right now, we've got the 10-year even at 4.00%, the 2-year 4.36%. Again, the S&P trading lower now by 7 points, down by about 0.2%. Spot gold up $3.50 the ounce to $2,031, higher by 0.2%. While West Texas Intermediate crude rebounding today, up 2.7%, $72.67 a barrel. Bottom line here, looking at a mixed market. Callie Cox is investment strategist at eToro USA Securities. Right here on Bloomberg Markets, she told us she does remain optimistic with a hint of skepticism.
A lot of retail investors have rotated into cash recently, and that to me tells me that there is some, positioning around economic uncertainty, positioning around a recession that could be coming.
And you can hear more of the conversation on the Tape podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcast. Juniper Networks surging on a Wall Street Journal report that the company is in advanced talks to be sold to HPE, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, for around $13 billion. Right now, we have got shares of Juniper surging by 22.4%. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise tumbling 7.1%. Certainly a story we're watching. Again, recapping stocks trading mix. The Dow, the S&P lower, NASDAQ higher, S&P down 6, drop there of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Lisa Mateo, Paul Sweeney, we're live here at our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio in New York City. We're also streaming live on YouTube, so you can head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Radio. Looking at these markets here, red and green on the tape, a little bit better than where we were earlier today. Not much happening really on the index level, but let's kind of go under the hood and see where the action is. Carmen Reineke, she covers equities for Bloomberg News. She joins us here in studio. Carmen, what are you looking at?
I'm still looking at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Juniper Networks. I mean, how often do you get one story that has the best performing stock in the S&P 500 and the worst performing stock in the S&P 500 on the same line?
And that tells you what the market thinks of this deal.
Yeah, exactly. So Juniper up almost 23%. This is the best one-day jump in almost 2 decades for this company. On the report that Hewlett-Packard Enterprise might buy it for $13 billion, which is a really significant percent of HPE's $21 billion market capitalization. That's part of the reason that we're seeing those shares of HPE down about 7%. Bernstein analyst Tony Sacconaghi says that HPE shareholders really wanted HPE to look to return this cash in buybacks or dividends. And so that might be why they're really souring on this deal and they're not seeing, the benefit in Juniper perhaps that HPE is seeing.
All right, what else we got?
Yeah, so the next thing I'm looking at, Illumina, ticker ILMN, is up about 8%, and Revvity, RVTY, is about 4.5%. Both companies posted preliminary revenue for the fourth quarter that came in better than expected. This is interesting just because both of these stocks, took a tumble in 2023, and today, they're seeing a little bit more optimism from investors and have helped lift the S&P 500 Life Sciences and Tools Index to its highest level since September. So that's one we'll certainly be watching, especially ahead of earnings season. Biotech obviously is like a really interesting sector. It's super volatile.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. It's binary. You the test either works, you get approval, and the stock just rips, or it doesn't, and it goes crush.
Exactly.
How about our good friends at Match? Is anybody swiping right on these guys?
Yeah, so I'm still looking at shares of Match, up about 3.3%. It's pared some of its gain. It was up as much as 12% earlier after the report that activist investor Elliott Management has built a roughly $1 billion stake in the company. I mean, Match's market capitalization on Monday was about $10 billion, so this is obviously a significant stake, but that was also about a quarter of where Match was in its pandemic peak. So this stock has just gotten a beating over the last few years, as has the rest of the industry. Bumble was down about 30% last year, and these companies, they own Tinder, they own Hinge. These are all the biggest sort of dating app stocks. So analysts here are really looking for Elliott to sort of like right the ship. At least at Tinder, there's already been a turnaround in place, and at least one analyst said that that's where they see there's probably the best case for long-term value. So we'll see sort of what comes next in this story.
The board here. I'm just trying to see who's at the board. Oh, Wendy Dang Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch's ex-wife is on the board there. Interesting. Oh. Okay, interesting stuff there. Carmen, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Carmen Reinecke. She covers all the equity markets for Bloomberg News here. MTCH is the symbol for Match up here today. All right, here's one of the concerns entering 2024 is that huge rally we had kind of in the last 10 weeks or so. Just pulled forward a lot of performance that maybe we would have looked forward to in 2024. So maybe that's taken away a little bit of some of the excitement for 2024. But let's check in with somebody who does this for a living. Looking to chat with Phil Komar. He covers all this stuff here. Philip, your managing partner, global strategist at MRB Partners. What did you make of that rally we had really towards the end of the year? I think it caught a lot of people, both in equity markets and bond markets, kind of off guard.
Yeah, well, it did, and it was breathtaking, really. But it was all on the Fed's pivot towards an easing policy, right? So we had seen through it much of the year. There was still this lingering anxieties that slowly got priced out in terms of recession fears, and that sort of solidified the pivot from the Fed, solidified the soft landing view, which I think is probably a mistake. It's going towards a no landing, but nonetheless, it solidified that, caused this rally. That being said, as you said, coming into the end of the year, there's a lot of chasing going on, and we ended up with that so-called Goldilocks scenario. Fully priced or well discounted, let's call it, within both the bond market and the equity market. So
now, what about tech stocks? I mean, it hadn't had the best start to 2024. Apple was struggling a little bit. Then Nvidia yesterday, they helped with the rally yesterday. So what are your thoughts as far as tech stocks into 2024? I mean, how much of a part will AI play into that as well?
Well, I think the AI theme has got legs over a long haul, but I think there was a lot of euphoria associated with that, and often, that euphoria gets priced in rapidly in a short period of time, and then it takes a long time to digest for those earnings to be sustained and the penetration to the broader market. So I think the unfortunate part for tech is well, you can decompose that between the Magnificent Seven, so to speak, or the leaders and the rest. But in general, as a tech index, the unfortunate part is we have high earnings, but we have, if you look on a 5-year basis of forward earnings expectations, they're very elevated. So it's got a big earnings bar to over hurdle here, and at the same time, CapEx spending towards tech is weakening. So I think this is a real challenge for tech. Is there's a lot of optimism in the price and the valuation. There's a lot of optimism in earnings expectations, and that's a bigger hurdle to overcome. Whereas I think some of the laggards in even the cyclical and some select defensives have lower earnings hurdles to overcome. They offer better valuation support. So while we've seen that big rally coming into year end, I would say heading here, you still want to be positioned in sort of that laggard catch-up theme, and that kind of spreads itself into some financials, maybe aerospace and defense is some of our likes. We recently pivoted back towards energy, after being beaten up a little bit last year on a relative basis. services. And then on the defensive side, it's more the healthcare. So looking for that transition, laggard catch-up theme.
So we've heard financials. We had actually had Scott Croner, the strategist from Citi, on this morning. That was one of the sectors he called out here. What's the risk here? And I'm not sure how material it is for a lot of these commercial real estate loans for these banks. Is that, I'm hearing that's not so much as a risk for some of the bigger banks. Maybe it is for maybe some of the regional banks. How do you think about that for these banks?
Yeah, so I think you really should decompose them. First of all, the aggregated of the commercial real estate is nothing in, I know there was some scares last year, but it's nothing in comparison to the subprime crisis and all that. So let's put it on that scale. It's very small in comparison. But it's heavily concentrated within regional banks. Okay. So when you look at the loan portfolios of the big banks, they're not very exposed to it. They got great capitalization ratios, all those kind of things. So if our preference towards banks, even before that Silicon Valley mishap, because of this reason, was to favor the mega caps. Yeah.
So the JP Morgan's, the Bank of America.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So the well-diversified banks, they don't have a risk. The loan portfolios will suffer, and there will be some regional elements to that where you'll see more blow-ups along the way. So I would discriminate to the extent that you can. Now they dominate the index, so if you had taken the index, you're probably okay. But if you can discriminate, definitely go towards your mega caps. Yeah.
Now, in your notes, you talk about the recent dramatic easing in monetary conditions. So what exactly does that mean? Is that soft landing, no landing? And what the heck does that mean? I mean, I sound like Matt Miller in the promo.
Yeah, and I think this is the key. I mean, a lot of the market had made a miscalculated bet last year, and we leaned heavily against that there was a recessionary scenario. And now they've gotten kind of solidified around the soft landing. Now, soft landing means that you end up with still positive growth, but below trend growth, and allow for disinflation, therefore allowing for the Fed to cut rates. And I think that's a mistake, because back in October, when bond yields were higher, Fed policy was at expectations towards the top, we had a soft landing in place at that point. And everything since October, this easing, we've got interest rate expectations easing, we've had bond yields drop, we've had corporate bond yields spreads come in, we've had mortgage spreads comes in. That's a dramatic easing in monetary conditions. And that actually takes us from a soft landing to a no landing. And when I mean no landing, I mean we're not going below trend growth this year, which really has some intermediate term ramifications for the inflation outlook. We're going to be in some soft window here. Well, let's call it transitory disinflation, so to speak, where the Fed can take an advantage of it in the near term as we get some soft prints. But a lot of that's pretty advantageous and kind of lucky. But if we're not going below trend, that super core basket, that services X shelter, is going to have a hard time really coming down in terms of inflation. Of course, that's a huge weight on the Fed's PC basket.
So for your investment outlook, what are you guys expecting this Fed to do this year?
So right now priced into the market's something like 6 rate cuts, so 150 basis points throughout the course of this year. I mean, I think the Fed wants to take advantage. It's been pretty clear that it wants to take advantage of this window of disinflation to try to rate cut. We expect 50, maybe 75. Nowhere a validation towards. First of all, we don't think it should cut
for the year.
For the year,
okay.
Yeah. So it doesn't need to cut. Yeah. We think it will anyway, but it won't validate what's in the bond market.
Now you talked about some of the things you liked. You mentioned energy, defense. What are you avoiding?
Well, honestly, we're avoiding a lot of the growth names related stuff. So the tech is a place where we'd be avoiding the other defensive sectors, because we're still constructive on pro growth. We just expect bond yields to come up. So we're selective on our defensives. We would be away from those bond proxies, because I think the downward adjustment in bond yields has probably had it here, where it'll soon stabilize and we'll see uplift in bond yields as the year goes on. So some of those bond proxies, the defensives we'd avoid. We'd favor the less exposed area like healthcare. In the cyclicals, it's those traditional growth stocks. And actually, if you look underneath the surface, if you take away, as you said, those magnificent sevens, and you start to look at small cap growth versus small cap value has been killing it, really, the growth stocks. It's only because of those 7 that help lift it up. So there's already a transition going underway here, and so that gets into your tech-related names, whether that be in the consumer discretionary index as well, and as well as tech.
Do you have any view on the topic of the day and tomorrow, which is an ETF for Bitcoin? Do you have any view there? Are you just waiting? I mean, do you guys even traffic in any of that kind of stuff?
We get questions periodically. I mean, look, I think Bitcoin and cryptos is a theme here to stay. Or it'll come back. But often what happens, and you saw this with the original, I've spent 20-some years doing mania profiling, booms and busts and those kind of things. And often what happens is the theme comes in a whoosh, sort of like the original .com. There's a whole bunch of names and companies and stuff that were crap in that you didn't want to own, but it was a thematic, it was a new technology revolution. Then it crashed, it had to go through a digestion, a restructuring phase, and then it comes out with something more legitimate. It morphs itself. So Bitcoin might be one of the players. Most of those other cryptos will be gone. Yep. But we'll formulate it over the next few years as regulations come in and structure comes to that market, and then there will be some element of a legitimate theme coming back out of it. I just think we're in that window now where.
But if BlackRock calls you up Tuesday and we got an ETF. You want to buy some of our Bitcoin ETF? What do you guys say?
No, yeah. I mean, not that I follow it that closely, but no, we do track it. We do some analysis on it.
Well, how about AI? Because a lot of people are saying AI kind of feels like the internet maybe. Back in 1995, this is Dan Ives from Wedbush will say this is the 1995 moment for AI, that this is really going to be established as something across, it's just going to be that big. Do you subscribe to that?
Yeah, I think AI is going to have tremendous ramifications through a lot of different businesses. I think it really will penetrate, and it'll be a long-term thematic. But unfortunately, as you remember in the 1990s, the original .com, there was a lot of euphoria around it. There were a lot of, even the winners, Cisco and some of the other technology-related names that were the top of the market back then took a long digestion period while they reformulated and came back in the 2000s. So it doesn't always make a good investment. I do think that structural theme is here. I'm interested in how that penetrates other businesses rather than just the sellers of AI. How are people going to maximize profit, widen margins, those kind of things by implementing it? And I think it may have a shorter rollout than the original tech wave, but it's still going to be years. This isn't months. So.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I mean, Bloomberg News has done scraping of conference calls, and every one of the S&P 500 companies, last quarter, the quarter before that, called out AI.
Oh yeah, because it's a boost to the stock. Of course.
Well, back in the day, when it was the end of that .com bust, I took a radio company public, plain old radio station company called Entercom, and we had orders coming into our desk for the IPO from people we didn't even talk to, and we'd call them up and say, "What are you doing?" They said, "Well, we're just buying this .com thing and Entercom." And we're like, "No, it's not a .com. It's not an internet company. It's a radio company." And
exactly. So, and it feels like that right now.
Yeah, it feels like that. So, I mean. On the tech side, if you want to play AI, do you just kind of stick to some of the big names today? A lot of people are saying just buy a Microsoft or something like that, as opposed to trying to find the niche players.
Yeah, I think probably at this phase, so there will be some real winners, I'm sure, in some of the niche players if you really sort through the mess. But I think you play the core themes. Also, right now we're dealing with an up cycle this year in trade and the semiconductor cycle. So some of the semi theme is better played outside of U.S. markets into places like Korea. Emerging Asia, Taiwan,
you guys
things like that. So we do, yeah.
How much of your portfolio is outside the U.S.?
Yeah, so we do research, and we do global integrated financial markets. So we do all markets, and so we do have an overweight in emerging Asia, ex-China, and we have an overweight in Euro area as well.
Yeah, we used to when we talked about Asia, we'd be Japan and non-Japan Asia, and we don't do that anymore. But people are talking about Japan coming back. I don't know. Even Warren Buffett's talking about it. So
yeah, we have a small position in Japan.
Yep.
Well. Yeah.
All right. All right. Philip Komar, thanks so much for joining us. Philip Komar, he's a managing partner and global strategist at MRB Partners, talking all things markets across the board here. Looking at the trading here, pretty much unchanged on the S&P 500, off about 0.1%. The Dow off 160 points. That's 0.4%. NASDAQ a little bit of a lift. They're up 10 points. Just about 0.1%. The yields coming in just slightly. 10-year Treasury off about a couple basis points, right at 4%, sitting right spot on 4%. So we'll take that. WTI crude oil up 2.4%. So a little bit of a risk off in there, in $72.44 there for WTI crude oil. And Bitcoin, got to call it out. It's off just a little bit. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some company news right now with Steve Rappaport.
Paul, they found the door that blew off a Boeing 737 MAX 9 jet, but investigators have yet to locate 4 bolts that were supposed to secure it. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle notes this jet, operated by Alaska Airlines, had other problems.
There was also a pressurization fail light that had lit up 3 times, so it wasn't allowed to fly long distance. A Bloomberg scoop, the plane had Wi-Fi installed after the fact, so it seems like there were some issues for this plane. As for Boeing, this stock is down again. It could get worse for them if the FAA does, in fact, ground all of the other 737 MAX aircraft, such as the 8 that were involved in the 2018-2019 tragedies.
Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle reporting. Alaska Airlines and United say they found loose bolts on MAX 9s that were grounded for inspection. Shares of Juniper Networks are soaring, with the Wall Street Journal reporting the tech company may be in for a takeover. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta has more.
The report here that there are in acquisition discussions with HP Enterprise. That's HPE, not the HPC that we traditionally think of when we think of HP. Remember, those are 2 different stocks here. Nevertheless, a pretty big number. HPE might be acquiring Juniper for about $13 billion. Of course, skyrocketed the company to a record high, basically pricing at a market value of about $9.6 billion.
Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta reporting. And General Motors sold fewer vehicles in China than in the U.S. for the first time since 2009. That's as consumers in the world's biggest auto market increasingly opt to go domestic. GM deliveries dropped around 9% to 2.1 million last year in China, whereas U.S. sales jumped 14% to 2.59 million. Those are the company stories we're following this hour. I'm Steve Rappaport. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 12:20 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the Dow, the S&P both lower. NASDAQ is advancing up 11 right now, gain of about 0.1%. NASDAQ 100 index full of big tech names. It is up now by 0.1% as well. The Russell 2000, though, is slumping now by 0.9%. 10-year yield 4.01%. The 2-year 4.37%. Spot gold little changed, up less than 0.1%. We've got gold at $2,029 the ounce. Bitcoin is lower by 0.6%, 46,818 right now on Bitcoin. And West Texas Intermediate crude is up 2.3%, 72.40 for a barrel of WTI. Starbucks shares right now are trading lower by 1.2%. Starbucks plans to open more than double its stores in India in 4 years, opening the equivalent of one new shopfront every 3 days as the country's growing middle class fuels a boom in coffee consumption. The global giant wants to operate 1,000 stores in India by the year 2028. Again, we do have shares of Starbucks trading lower now, down by 1.2%. Recapping stocks are mixed, with the S&P lower by 5, down 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pelleton, thank you so much. We appreciate that. We are here, Lisa Mateo, Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. We're streaming live on YouTube, so you can head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Radio, and that's where you'll find us. Coming up around 12:40 p.m. Wall Street time, simulcast Bloomberg Technology interviews Qualcomm CEO Cristiano Amon from the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Right now, we need to get the latest on what's happening with the good folks at Boeing. We're checking with George Ferguson. He's a senior aerospace airline analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Been following this company for decades. So, George, I guess I'd like to start here. How much, at the end of the day, do you think this is going to be a Boeing issue versus one of its suppliers, in this case Spirit, or does it even matter?
So I think it doesn't matter, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's Boeing's job to get a airworthy airplane out the back door in Renton, and so they've got to make sure that all the processes work to create that. And if they're pushing things out the back door there that aren't ready to fly, it's their problem. And so I would say, since yesterday, what we've sort of learned, a couple different things we've learned. One, we found that there were loosened bolts in other Alaska and United airliners, which tells us that, again, we don't think it's so much a defect in the product as it's as we said yesterday, but it's a manufacturing process issue, and that it was consistently missed, which is worse than having it be just a one-off anomaly. One of the other things we're also learning is Boeing may have been using some of these, these portals, these exit holes to load some of the components into the airplane. So there also could be a situation where, they were taking this door plug off to be able to load seats and things like that into the fuselage, and then they would have been responsible for making sure the bolts were properly fastened. So I think, where we are is it really looks like, again, manufacturing issue at Spirit or at Boeing. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's Boeing's responsibility to push it out the back door and be ready to fly.
Yeah, George, you mentioned a lot of airlines, more airlines have been finding these loose parts. So are safety officials, are they going to be expanding this investigation beyond just the MAX 9? I mean, what kind of implication would that have for Boeing?
Yeah, so expanding it beyond the MAX 9 would be bad, right? Because that's going to end up taking a bunch more effort, I think, at Boeing to help manage customers' problems as they're trying to get airplanes back into fleets. You'd have a lot more customer remuneration costs, right, as you'd have to pay airlines for, I think you may even have to pay them for some of the inspections. And if there's downtime, you got to probably pay them for downtime. So I think it'd be pretty bad to see it expand. Still, I don't know that I'm in that camp yet, right? It seems to me, we saw some bolt issues on rudders. It seemed to be very, very one-off. We saw that around the end-of-year holidays. But right now, it seems to be really focused on this plug on the Dash 9. So to me, it still seems like it's a very Dash 9-driven issue. But none of this story is good, right? You don't want to have any of these problems happening on completed airliners. It's just a sign of the challenges, I think, inside Boeing and inside their supplier base right now.
Well, in a couple of days, I'm supposed to be flying one of those Dash 9s, so maybe I'll walk on board with a crescent wrench or something, just in case anything needs to be tightened here. So, yes. George, where are we kind of... has the FAA grounded the 900 series? Or are they just saying, hey, guys, fix it?
No, I believe the Dash 9 is grounded right now.
Okay.
I think they've grounded the fleet. But again, I don't think anything else outside of the Dash 9 fleet has been grounded.
And so...
I think right now... Sorry, Boeing's...
Yeah, how long what's the sense of timing? How long do you think they'll be grounded? Because that's kind of the issue for Boeing.
Well, my guess is that once that Boeing comes up with the process for inspection, which they have, and inspections are underway right now, they would start to release airplanes as they got inspected in the field. And so, I mean, my guess is that sometime this week, you'd probably start to have airplanes being released after being inspected, provided we don't expand anything from here.
Now, we learned that investigators, they found out a little bit more about things like the movement of the door panel before it ejected. I mean, what are some of the things they're saying about what they know right now?
Yeah, I saw that that it had moved up and out, right? The bolts had kept it from moving along a track, and without the bolts, it moved along the track. I don't know that tells us, still. What I heard is that the door still has to go to a lab to find out whether or not the fasteners failed or they just weren't attached correctly, right? And I think if you had a fastener that, maybe wasn't bolted securely in, you're going to get sort of wind resistance playing on it, trying to work it out of the channels it's supposed to be in. That's got to be a little bit of a challenge, I think, to figure out. But I guess they know ways to do that because it would probably look similar to a failure, and you've got to figure out if there was just slop in there that created the failure, if it was just an absolute failure due to metallurgy. And
George, it's kind of a similar time. I just saw a Bloomberg News report, I think yesterday, that Boeing delivered a lot of planes in 2023. Talk to us about kind of their deliveries. Where are they in terms of capacity, and kind of what's the outlook for 24, given now some of these new issues?
Yeah, so, Boeing was moving to higher production rates as we were finishing up the year. I think we're kind of looking to be 38-ish a month. We think everything's a bit aspirational, meaning that they sort of target these higher build rates and the supply chain in fits and starts allows them to, in some months, to achieve the total number a little bit higher than that, and then in some months less. So with that 40-month, right, you got about 480 airplanes. I think they could probably deliver in 2024, plus some of the airplanes in inventory, that they've been sitting on. So I think, we're up in the 500 levels, and I think that's the big question right now is if this doesn't get to be too much of an inspection program or a grounding program, something that pulls in a lot of Boeing resources, we would still expect that they would hit some of those targets for 737 deliveries in 2024. That's kind of why we're watching very closely to see how it develops.
Now, you talked about the impact of Boeing, the impact of Spirit, its supplier. What about the impact on airlines overall? How do you see that?
Well, I mean, if this becomes a broader issue, it's going to impact the amount of capacity that airlines can put in the market. Now, again, I've sort of talked a little bit about this yesterday. Q1 is traditionally one of the weaker travel seasons, so it could help drive fares up a little bit, create a little bit of scarcity in the marketplace. It's not the worst quarter to happen in. You'd never want this to happen, period, right? Full stop. But Q1 wouldn't be terrible. It's very U.S. focused because the two biggest flyers of the -9 are going to be United and Alaska. So it very much would impact the U.S. capacity. I don't see much of any implications right now for European or Asia capacity. And other customers include Copa and Aeromexico, so you could see a little bit of Latin American capacity. But I think the biggest effects would be in the U.S. and again, knock down a little bit of capacity, might firm fares a little bit.
Hey, George, if I'm a salesperson at Airbus, I'm calling up all my customers and saying, come on, guys, haven't you had enough of these Boeing people? Come on, let's start buying some of my planes.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. The only other problem with that is that when the customer on the other end of the phone says to the Airbus salesperson, hey, yeah, I'm ready to buy, when can I get delivery? If you just take their straight backlog and you do the division by, 60 airplanes a month, Airbus, and they're not producing there yet, but they plan to soon. Airbus is still 9 years of backlog on the A320. I don't think they're all coming sequentially, so maybe you're 7 years out, 6 years out. That's another sort of, that's a little bit of a saving grace for Boeing here, is that if you want, I think, nearer term deliveries, Airbus has a hard time delivering it, and their supply chain isn't perfect, right? So they want to get up to 75 somewhere around mid-decade. We think that's very, very aspirational. I'm not sure they're ever going to get there. So they're working the supply chain to get there, but that's the challenge. If both of these companies get supply chains to work well, we'd have a lot more airplanes in the marketplace. I think that's part of the reason those backlogs are building like they are too, right? Because if you look at it as a fleet manager, you're thinking, I need to get in that backlog soon, because whatever they say the timeline is, it's probably longer than that.
All right, George, thanks so much for joining us. Always appreciate getting your thoughts. George Ferguson, Senior Aerospace Airline Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, getting the latest on Boeing. Again, another challenge for them on the safety front. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. World and National News with Nancy Lyons.
Thanks, Paul. A federal appeals court is mulling over arguments today on whether former President Trump is immune from prosecution on charges that he illegally tried to overturn the 2020 election. D. John Sauer argued on behalf of Trump.
To authorize the prosecution of a president for his official acts would open a Pandora's box from which this nation may never recover.
Attorneys for the Department of Justice argued there is no broad immunity that prevents former presidents from being prosecuted for criminal acts committed while in office. The National Transportation Safety Board is on the scene of the mid-air emergency Friday in which a panel flew off an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9 aircraft in mid-flight. Subsequent inspections have found other MAX 9 jets with loose bolts on similar panels. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy spoke on Good Morning America.
We have heard reports from United, Alaska, and Boeing about loose bolts. We are aware of those. Those are being reported to the Federal Aviation Administration, who's in charge of the inspections and the mandates for the repair.
Homendy says she would feel safe flying despite the discovered issues.
The European Union says 2023 has been deemed the hottest year on record, and its report says it's been driven by human-caused climate change. UK climate scientist Adam Scaife says this trend is likely to continue.
We know from past historical observations and from our forecasts that El Nino effect, even though it will slowly decline into the spring, will have this lagged effect and boost the temperatures for 2024, adding onto what we've had for 2023.
According to one study, extremes between El Niños and La Niñas have intensified roughly 30% since 1960. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Lisa Mateo, Paul Sweeney live here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Coming up in just a moment here, we're going to bring you Bloomberg Technology's Ed Ludlow. He's out in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show, and he's sitting down here with Qualcomm CEO Cristiano Amon, again, from the CES in Vegas. Here is Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow.
Welcome to our Bloomberg television and radio audiences worldwide. We are live at CES Las Vegas, and we're talking to the CEO of Qualcomm, Cristiano Amon. Cristiano, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Ed.
There is a flood of wide-ranging news and announcements, but I actually want to start on your updated XR chip. This is a processor that you are going to put into headsets, mixed reality headsets that will take on the Apple Vision Pro. And I just want you to talk about how confident you are that you will take on the Apple Vision Pro and at what end of the market you're going to help support.
Look, we have been a big believer in spatial computing, and I think the XR Gen 2, it's another instance of what we have been doing generation after generation to get 4K spatial compute on each eye. But most important is we've been driving how to bring scale. You see some of the partnerships we have with Meta, what they've been doing with the Quest series. We're working and announced, I think, a while ago that we're working with Samsung and Google. You saw some devices being announced from Sony. I think that's a great opportunity. And the key thing is, can you get that to a scale with the performance and the price point that we excite developers? I think it's a great opportunity.
On the scale point, there is a feeling that Apple will come in with the Vision Pro or a next generation at a lower price point and just take the market. Based on the demand you've had for XR2 Plus, is that going to be the case or not?
I think you have to look at this in a different way. I think Apple is doing a great job. I think what they've done with the Vision Pro, it's great if you look at the device. And to bring it to scale, all that this is going to do is to ignite the developer ecosystem. At the end of the day, those computing platforms and developers creating content, the more that you have, more content, and that content that they're going to help create is going to be available on other platforms as well, and vice versa. It's about creating the next spatial computing platform. It's a great opportunity. We're still in the early growth stage of this market.
You have been to many CESs. I have been to a few. It's always hard to find a common theme, but this year there is clearly a common theme, which is AI. And you and I have talked in the past about on-device AI use, particularly in the cell phone or smartphone context. This year, the PC seems to be the battleground. What is Qualcomm doing AI on PC?
Look, we're incredibly excited, and we feel kind of what we have been saying is validated. If we look at all of the other companies all announcing on-device AI, something we've been talking for more than a year. If you look what we did at Snapdragon Summit, we announced X Elite, which right now is the king of all device AI computing platforms for the PC, has an integrated total 75 TOPS tera operations per second. And we started to see what Microsoft is doing, other companies doing. This is exciting. Just to put in perspective, we have over 30 different AI models being ported to the Snapdragon platform, preparing for this on-device AI PC. And it's going to change user experience, going to change productivity. Look at the number of CEOs talking about how they're investing in this. And when you run on a device, it's more secure, and you have context, and you have privacy.
So ARM, as an example, has been talking about the promise of chips that power AI on PC for quite a long time. And it kind of hasn't materialized until now. When I posted on X and asked our audience, what are you most excited about from a technology or gadget perspective 2024? To be fair, many people replied and said Snapdragon Elite. So what does Snapdragon Elite look like in the real world this year, 2024? How many consumers can actually sit at their laptop or PC and do something of interest?
Oh, you're going to be able to do a lot. So maybe just to put a perspective on X Elite, because there's a lot of excitement. We're very happy with the number of designs. It's going to launch together with the new version of Windows. It's going to have on-device Copilot. And there's so many things you'll be able to do. From be able to have a computer now that's going to predict your every moment. You're going to have Copilot when you talk about the Windows ecosystem across all the different applications. And there's a number of other use cases when you think about visual models, language models. They're being developed. They're very exciting. And I think that's happening on PC, that's happening on phones, that's going to happen on cars as well.
To our Bloomberg television and radio audience worldwide, we're live in Las Vegas at CES, and we're speaking to Cristiano Amon, CEO of Qualcomm. Let's set a baseline and say there is still some weakness in the global smartphone market, right? What functionality in this AI era is going to bring the consumer back to start the upgrade cycle, to get smartphone growth like we've seen in prior cycles?
Well, it's a great question. As far as the weakness, I think we did say in the last earnings call that the correction and the inventory correction is behind us right now. So we're excited about the market being stable. And then it leads to exactly this point that you bring up. What is going to create a new upgrade cycle that people want to buy a new phone? And we're 100% convinced is what's happening right now with Gen AI on the phone. The way you need to think about it, we have been accustomed to the experience that you have a platform, or the OS platform, on top of the computer, you have the apps, and you go in and you touch it. But now, on top of the OS, you're going to have those models that try to predict your every move. And it's going to bring not only efficiency, but new use cases. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that with automatic translation. We're seeing that with web summarization. We're seeing that with ability to create content, and they did content in real time, content that didn't exist before, using visualization models, and many more. And something as simple as texting is going to have context that will allow the AI to bring information that you may want to share, or you may want to schedule, all part of the experience. I'm believing the next user experience is going to be based on Gen AI on the phones, and we're optimistic that we could start to see devices as early as this year with those capabilities.
Okay, so in early as this year, with that in mind, what is your 2024 global smartphone call outlook?
Difficult to make a call of the total market. I think we're just happy that the market is now stable. The correction is behind us. And let's see what our partners can launch. Stay tuned for example, what Samsung is going to announce soon. I think there's a lot of excitement about the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3.
Automotive. You are very bullish on automotive, and you've tried to position the company to diversify the company, but automotive is a key pillar. 10% of revenue is kind of the target, 2026, end of decade, 9 billion of sales. What data hits your desk that tells you you're on track for that?
Oh, we're on track. I think we had said we're going to get to 4 billion first milestone, and then we're going to get to the 9 billion at the end of the decade. I think we're ahead of those targets. What is really showing traction is the number of OEMs that have been working with Qualcomm, and how we continue to add to the pipeline of design. I think what's resonating, the car industry is transforming to a digital industry.
But what is I'm sorry to interrupt, Cristiano, but same question as with the smartphone or PC. What is the functionality, if I'm a customer or end user, that's going to change my mind about buying this vehicle that has something it doesn't have today that you are contributing to?
Well, you've already seen that. See, the good thing about tracking Qualcomm progress for us is less about the market size. It's more about gaining share, and new models are launching the technology. You can see some of the cars. If you're going to go buy a car today, let's just say the Mercedes E-Class, what GM is doing with their car line and many others, you have a fully immersive digital cockpit. You didn't have that before. That's enabled by Snapdragon.
Right.
Now you have those beautiful screens that are immersive, and it bring you a lot of information about the car, the road. On top of that, you have safety. And we have a vision that assisted driving needs to be in every car. For example, the announcement we did at the show in a partnership with Bosch, we have now announced at the CES a central compute platform that you can have ADAS in a digital cockpit on the same silicon, which basically you can do that for premium cars, now bring it to entry-level cars.
Mass market.
Those are going to be completely different changes in how you think about safety and how to think about your driving experience.
Cristiano, we just have 30 seconds left, but where geographically is the automotive growth coming from? Which markets?
For us, it's across the board, because you should think about us as new models launch of our technology, we gain share. We're working with all the Americans, all the Europeans, all the Koreans, all the Japanese, all the Chinese. So pretty much the entire automotive industry. I would be hard-pressed to tell you a car company we're not working with.
Qualcomm CEO Cristiano Amon, live from CES Las Vegas. Back to you.
All right, that was Bloomberg Technology's Ed Ludlow sitting down with Qualcomm CEO Cristiano Amon from the CES conference in Vegas, talking all things chips. We're going to have more coming up with Kujan Sobhani, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Semiconductor Analyst. We're going to talk a little bit more about Qualcomm and the future of that company and that stock. But first, let's get a little bit of a reset here. We'll check in with our good friend, Charlie Pellet.
Day for the U.S. stock market. The Dow, the S&P, they are both lower. NASDAQ is advancing. We've got the NASDAQ Composite Index up now by about 19 points. That is a gain of 0.1%. Qualcomm shares are advancing now by 1%. Cristiano Amon is the CEO of Qualcomm. Moments ago, right here on Bloomberg Markets, he was talking about demand for new cell phones and his company's new smartphone chips.
What is going to create a new upgrade cycle that people want to buy a new phone? And we're 100% convinced is what's happening right now with Gen AI on the phone.
And again, Qualcomm shares, they are advancing now by just about 1%. We've got stocks fluctuating after a tech-led bounce as Treasury 10-year yields remained above 4%. Oil is climbing. Let us begin with crude oil, West Texas Intermediate, now up by 2.6%, $72.63 a barrel. Spot gold, little changed, up 25 cents the ounce right now at $2,028. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ trading mix, little change on the S&P, down 4 points. Drop there of 0.1%. The Dow down 165, down 0.4. NASDAQ, the composite index, up by 0.1%. NASDAQ 100 up by 0.2%. 10-year 4.01% with a 2-year 4.37%. Again, recapping, stocks are trading mixed. S&P now lower, little change, down 4 points. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate that. We just heard from the CEO of Qualcomm with our own Ed Ludlow out in Las Vegas at the CES conference, talking about the chip business, semiconductor business. Very bullish was the CEO here. So let's check in and get a little bit more color on Qualcomm and kind of where we are in that semiconductor cycle. We can do that with Kujan Sobhani. He's a Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Semiconductor Analyst. Kujan, thanks so much for joining us here. I'm not sure if you were able to listen to the CEO from Qualcomm speaking with Ed Ludlow, but give us your view on Qualcomm right here.
Yeah, I mean, look, from a semiconductor cycle point of view, entering 2024, they are in a good position relatively versus what they were last year. You know, the smartphone end market inventory has almost cleared out and has reached sort of a normalized position where the sell-in and sell-through are sort of equal. So relative to 2023 comps, we forecast 24 to be a growth year, both for the smartphone phone market as well as for the smartphone chip makers like Qualcomm. So it's going to be a good year for them.
So they're at the Consumer Electronics Show, which, you know, I've been going out there for 35 years, and I kind of now joke that it's really the auto show with some technology companies surrounding it. Talk to us about the auto business for the chip business in general and Qualcomm particularly.
Yeah, I mean, look, for Qualcomm, for the likes of Qualcomm and NVIDIA, the auto business is a great business, despite of what is happening in the overall end market. Sure, you must have heard the recent guide down from Mobileye. So the end market is sort of looking shaky going into next year, but for these companies, it's a new market. They are focusing on the new high-end application and use cases of something like digital cockpit and ADAS, which you typically see in the new cars and EVs. So this is a new market for them. So despite of the market slowing, you know, even if a small percentage share gain for them could imply into revenue growth. So this is a particularly interesting end market for them.
So Internet of Things, what does the Internet of Things mean to you and you as a chip analyst? What does it mean to you in kind of in terms of the what it really is and what the growth opportunities are?
Yeah, for Qualcomm, it's the most diversified segment. Look, they have 3 sub-segments in IoT: industrial, edge, and consumer. So consumer, you can think of primarily is what they are targeting, the AI PCs, which has been the big buzz going into CES, right, with NVIDIA and AMD and Intel and Qualcomm all announcing their AI PC offerings. 24 year is expected to be the AI PC launch year. So that's what their biggest opportunity is in their consumer IoT. I mean, it should not be IoT, but that's how they group it in. But other than that, it's really the edge and industrial, which is really the industrial automation boom, right? The smart home. Like when you look at our homes these days, everything is sort of a smart device, whether it's security, whether it's place. So that's where Qualcomm is trying to target that opportunity.
So as I look at the, kind of the breakup of where Qualcomm gets its revenue, where are companies like Qualcomm in terms of, are they still, I guess, subject to the overall cyclicality of the chip business? I'm just wondering, as they diversify away from the PC segment over time with these other types of things, whether it's automotive or Internet of Things, does that make the industry and these companies less cyclical?
That's what they're aiming for, and Qualcomm's big push since Cristiano took over has been diversification. Unfortunately, it is still a smartphone company, so it is heavily exposed to these cycles which occur in markets like PCs and smartphones. I mean, if I look at next year, handsets are going to be still 66 or 65% of its revenue. That's just the chip business. You have more over there from licensing, which is predominantly handsets. So they seek to diversify, and that's why they're investing in automotive and IoT. But as of today, it's still primarily a smartphone company based on the revenue, and which is a very heavily cyclical market.
Yep. So in your 2024 outlook, Kunjan, for the semiconductor space, what are the couple, two or three themes you want your clients to be aware of and to be focusing on?
Yeah, the top theme is definitely AI. We think from a fundamental growth point of view, 24 will be, again, a very robust growth year for AI. Apart from the cloud and data center deployments, we think 24 will see a good adoption in enterprises. Definitely for PCs and smartphones, as they were beaten down last year, we see both of those end markets for the chip makers to see decent growth coming into 24. And the final thing is, as you're seeing at CES, the sort of AI, the year of the AI PCs. We don't know how much of that will be reflecting in the estimates for 2024. I think it might be too soon, but the wave and the push towards it might be a good tailwind, at least coming in 25 for these chip makers.
All right, so for lay people like me, Kunjan, don't live this chip stuff and this tech stuff day in and day out like you do, if someone were to ask me what's the big AI play, I would have just answered NVIDIA, because they're the ones that put out that guidance that got everybody's attention. I know you have a much more nuanced answer to that. So again, you're at a cocktail party and somebody says, hey, what's the best way to play AI in your space? How do you come back to it?
NVIDIA definitely would be the first answer. I mean, from a fundamental point of view, again, they're expected to be growing the fastest, the biggest. But apart from NVIDIA, I think you also like, again, from a fundamental perspective, Broadcom and AMD. I think after NVIDIA, those two names have sort of the biggest opportunity to grow, get the fastest AI growth, especially in the data center market.
Hey, Kunjan, I heard the CEO of Qualcomm talking about sales to China. What's the situation for a lot of your chip companies just dealing with China as a customer, supplier, all that stuff? Where are we today?
I mean, look, for any large chip company, China is going to be somewhere between 20 to 30% of revenue, if not more. Yep. So that's definitely a risk. Now, I think you have to look at it from company to company, use case to use case. Someone like Qualcomm has been shielded from all the regulatory restrictions because their products are more primarily going in consumer devices, which have not seen the scrutiny from the U.S. regulations. But someone like NVIDIA is seeing heavily impacted by that. So it goes, I think it will depend from which use case and applications you sell into. So far, the applications it seem which have geopolitical risk have been, again, very high-end AI and generative AI.
Yep.
The consumer devices have been shielded from it.
All right, Kunjan, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you hopping on. Kunjan Sopani, Bloomberg Intelligence, senior semiconductor analyst, talking about Qualcomm and the chip space in general. Again, Qualcomm stock's up about 1% today. Over the trailing 12 months, it's up about 25%. And this is a company with $156 billion market cap, so a good move there. And again, as Kunjan was saying, this is a cyclical business. PCs, handsets, the phones, all that type of thing. So you got to stay on top of that. Sound On with Joe Matthew. That starts right now from Washington, D.C.
from our nation's capital, this is Bloomberg Sound On.
Two major stories that we're following here developing before our eyes.
What does it say about Trump's influence on the Republican Party?
What can the Biden administration do on its own to support Israel?
Bloomberg Sound On. Politics, policy, and perspective from D.C.'s top names.
The Republican caucus is at war with itself.
Members of Congress would have a press conference every day if somebody would cover that.
There is bipartisan support for Israel.
This is one of the big ones we only see once every decade or 2 decades in the Middle East.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
2 weeks to New Hampshire. Welcome to the fastest show in politics with new polling today from the first in the nation primary state that may challenge the conventional wisdom and what you think will happen 2 weeks from today. We're going to go to ground in the Granite State coming up with Chris Galderi, political scientist at St. Anselm University in Manchester. The new spending deal on Capitol Hill we talked about yesterday is resonating on the campaign trail as candidates begin to take a stand here. And the Secretary of State is back in Tel Aviv to talk post-war with Israel. We'll have analysis on all of these stories from our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis with us for the hour. And it's all after a look at Wall Street. Let's get started on trading in New York with Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much, Joe Matthew. Little change right now on the S&P, down 2 points, dropped there just about 0.1%. The S&P at 4760. The Dow is down 169 points, a drop right now of about 0.4%, while NASDAQ is up 36. That is a gain of 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.00% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.36%. Spot gold right now at 2,027 the ounce. Little change there, down less than 0.1%. An advance for crude oil, though, up 2.5%, 72.57 a barrel. Next Thursday, this coming Thursday, we do get inflation data in the form of the CPI report. The next Fed decision is January 31st. So what about the Federal Reserve and the interest rate environment? Michael Kontopoulos is head of fixed income at Richard Bernstein Advisors.
You know, the number of cuts priced for the first half of this year is pretty much way overdone. And in fact, what you're likely to see is a much stronger economy than the market expects. You're most likely to see a Fed that stays on hold for much longer than the market expects. And where's the pricing for the another hike? We haven't seen that yet.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance Podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. We're keeping an eye on Juniper Networks. That stock now up by 22.4%. Juniper up the most in nearly 2 decades after the Journal reported that the company is in advanced talks to be sold to Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. The Journal citing sources, HPE shares, they're down now by 8%. Again, Juniper jumping 22.4%. Recapping, S&P now little changed, up by 0.5 point. The Dow down 152, down 0.4, while NASDAQ is up 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Right, Charlie, we thank you. And thanks for being with us here. If we could get the return off, that would be fantastic, as we're off and running here with the Tuesday edition of Bloomberg Sound On. Hearing way too much of myself, and that's much better. Thank you, everybody. With 2 weeks to go, we're counting down to the New Hampshire primary. By the way, 6 days to Iowa. But as we look across the political landscape today, it sure feels like however important Iowa will be, it's going to be a blip. A week from today, it will be all about New Hampshire. Candidates will leave Iowa that night and will go to ground in the Granite State, where they will stay. They will live for the better part of a week here leading up to voting. We're going to be there with you through all of it. And of course, everyone thinks they know what's going to happen here, right? Of course, Donald Trump has been looking pretty comfortable in the polls, and there's been a great storyline behind the Nikki Haley campaign showing surging polling in New Hampshire. And we have 2 competing surveys today that will satisfy everyone depending on what you're looking for here. One of them is from Suffolk University, the Boston Globe, and USA Today. Nikki Haley, 20 points behind Donald Trump, 46-26 in New Hampshire. A lot of folks would say a potentially insurmountable lead. Well, look at what CNN is talking about with the University of New Hampshire. The survey center they're at with their own poll shows Nikki Haley cutting into Donald Trump's lead in New Hampshire, cutting the lead to single digits, 39% to 32%, with Nikki Haley up a dozen points since that last poll in November. That's the storyline we've been hearing more about. And while we'll talk about this with Rick and Jeannie ahead, I wanted to talk to Chris Galderi because he's there. And we're going to talk to him when we get to New Hampshire. Of course, political scientist and professor at St. Anselm University. Chris, it's great to see you. I don't know if you're going to be leaning toward one pole or the other, but I wonder if we're getting closer to reality here. You know, we were talking about national polls and a lot of pie-in-the-sky stuff 6 months ago, but it's about time for people to vote. What's New Hampshire think?
Well, I think New Hampshire is at a point where the folks who don't pay that much attention or who are only sort of engaged with the process are actually starting to tune in. And that's one of the things that makes primaries so interesting. They can be volatile because you have a lot of late deciders. If you look at polling from past years, there are a lot of folks who don't decide who they're going to vote for until they are getting in the car or closing the front door to go to their polling place. Which means stuff like Iowa is going to matter. What people say in debates, what they don't say in debates, if they have gaffes or inspiring moments or that sort of thing, really can lead to big shifts late in the game.
Well, really interesting here, and I know that Iowa will have some level of influence. New Hampshire has its own brand here, and as they say, Iowa picks corn, New Hampshire picks presidents. But to what extent does momentum coming out of Iowa impact the results in New Hampshire?
Well, I think a lot depends on what the story coming out of Iowa is. Right now, a lot of folks are speculating that Haley may actually pass DeSantis for second place. If she does that, I think that, again, contributes to this narrative, this storyline that Haley is on the rise. And I think that will make there be a lot of pressure to look at New Hampshire as essentially a two-candidate race, as between Trump and Haley. I think in those circumstances, we'd be having a lot of conversations. Well, what does Ron DeSantis do? What does Chris Christie do? And think back to 1984, Gary Hart's big splash. He came out of Iowa down to Walter Mondale by 30 points, but he was in second place, and nobody expected that. So I think, in a sense, the expectations game is kind of goofy. That's a technical term, but I think it can really affect what we'll be talking about and how we'll be talking about this race in that week between Iowa and New Hampshire.
You think back to 2016. And I remember talking to you then how different the race was. Donald Trump was in New Hampshire a lot. He decided to really plant his flag there. It was town hall every other weekend. How much time has he spent there in the state? Because it's been a storyline that he's barely gone to Iowa, and it looks like he may well win the caucuses.
Yeah, he has not been here a lot. I think the number of events he has held in this state is in the mid-single digits. I want to say like 5, 6, 7, something like that. But it's been nothing like the on-the-ground presence that he had 8 years ago. That said, his campaign is much more professional, much more, for want of a better term, normal than it was in 2016. So there really is an organized Trump campaign in terms of phone calls and mailers and door knocking and that sort of thing. His ads are all over TV and all over streaming. And, my 5-year-old was watching a Minecraft video and got Trump and Haley videos during it. So, they're really targeting voters there. Yeah.
They're hitting the Minecraft players.
Turn this off. Yeah.
That's pretty creative, I have to admit. Now you're getting young people where they're actually working here. And I was visiting family in New England, not even in New Hampshire, but in Massachusetts, knowing they have to buy the Boston market. And I mean, it's every other commercial. I can't imagine the level of exhaustion right now when it comes to the ads. Who's on TV the most right now in New Hampshire, Chris?
I'd say it's a toss-up between Trump and Haley. I've barely seen anything for DeSantis. I think I've seen maybe one Christie ad. But really, if you're just watching TV, it's at least the stuff I'm watching looks like a two-candidate race.
How about that? Are you leaning towards one poll or the other here, that Donald Trump is in fact enjoying a single-digit lead, as one poll would suggest, or a 20-point spread like we're seeing in the other?
It's really tough. I can envision either one being more accurate. The Haley numbers aren't actually off that much or there's not that much difference. 26-32 is at sort of like the far end of the margin of error. What I think is more interesting is you have one poll where Trump is under 40. If Trump is under 40 on primary night, we're going to be talking about how much he underperformed, why wasn't he able to close the deal here, that sort of thing. If he's coming in 46%, we'll say, wow, he's nearly at 50%. If there's an anti-Trump coalition, it didn't show up tonight. So I think, depending on which one of these is closer to what we get, I think 2 weeks from tonight. 2 weeks from tonight,
it sure is.
We'll be having really different conversations about the race.
Yeah, understood. And that's what is what's just incredible about this stage of the race, and knowing that this could go in a couple of different directions here, likely in the next couple of weeks. Chris, last time we were there, 2020, it was, of course, the Democrats we were really talking about here. And I'll never forget talking with Joe Biden, who was said to be on the verge of dropping out of the race. It was supposed to be an exit interview. And what happened between New Hampshire and South Carolina was remarkable, as just one candidate after the other dropped out of the race. Are we going to see something like that? Not that there are that many left. What happens to this field after New Hampshire? Or could something happen before New Hampshire? Could Chris Sununu, for instance, talk Chris Christie into dropping out of this race?
That's a great question. I think, with Christie, the vibe I get is that he's attracting the really dedicated anti-Trump voters, the people who turned out and voted for Bill Weld in 2020. And I think that's a fundamentally different approach and a fundamentally different group of voters than the ones who are being drawn to Haley, who's not attacking Trump, but she's saying, he was fine in 2016, but we need a new generation, we need a younger voice, that sort of thing, and really being very gentle and hands off with her criticisms of him. I think if Christie were to get out, I think that would probably boost Haley. I don't think there are many Christie voters whose second choice is Donald Trump. Then you've got Ron DeSantis. He was pulling, I think, 5% in one of these polls. I think the CNN UNH poll. I don't know that there are many Ron DeSantis voters whose second choice is Nikki Haley. So if you're Nikki Haley, you probably you'd like Christie to get out. You wouldn't mind Asa Hutchinson, who's still in there, getting like 1 or 2% to get out and endorse you. But you probably want DeSantis to stick around. You probably figure the guy who's running as Trumpism without Trump is probably drawing votes away from Trump and not from you.
When does it get crazy? Is it a week from today when all the campaigns will be there? You can't get a booth at the Red Arrow Diner?
Yeah, when you wake up on the Tuesday after the Iowa caucus, you will discover that your friends and neighbors have covered the state in signs for their preferred candidates. You will hear about which candidate had a 3 a.m. landing at Manchester Airport or the private airfield in Concord. That is when the circus comes to town and sets up on Elm Street in Manchester. It's when people bring out the livestock with shirts and sweaters with candidates' names on them.
Are we going to get a Trump rally on the eve? Have we heard anything about it?
I have not heard anything, but that's what he did in 2020. In 2020, he held a rally at an arena in downtown Manchester, and basically just sort of he didn't dominate coverage, but he took a lot of wind out of the sails of Democrats who were hoping that they would have the front page of the Union Leader and the Concord Monitor and other local papers to themselves on primary day.
Hey, Chris, I'm looking forward to seeing you up there. I appreciate you coming on today. Chris Galdieri, with 2 weeks to go, St. Anselm College political science professor. Great to see you as we assemble our panel. They'll be there too, of course. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us here, our signature panel back together again. And I wonder, Jeannie, your thoughts on these polls here, because this is the menu of options. Is Donald Trump going to walk into New Hampshire with a commanding lead, or is Nikki Haley truly nipping at his heels, as this CNN UNH poll would tell us?
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating. When we look at where she has been and where she has come, her star is rising at just the right time. And so I do think Trump really can have a run for his money from Nikki Haley. Of course, the CNN poll, one poll. But again, when you look at her trajectory over time, she really is narrowing this gap. And, it's really in keeping with something that I've heard, and I'm sure other pollsters have heard, which is when people have been door knocking in places like New Hampshire and South Carolina and elsewhere on behalf of Nikki Haley, they have sometimes heard people who say, I do support the former governor. I'm not sure I want to say that publicly necessarily, because of course, to go against Trump is to support a Democrat. I mean, that's how it's been laid out. And of course, those people don't feel that way at all. So I keep wondering, do we see a growing silent majority who, once this is unleashed and these polls come out and if she does better in Iowa than expected, comes in a strong 2, does that sort of unleash this for her? So I think there's real possibility and momentum with Haley at this point.
Rick, I know you're taking the Haley campaign seriously, and you've told us that we all should here in New Hampshire. Does that mean that you buy into this single-digit spread that we're seeing in one of 2 polls today?
You know, that's a pretty aggressive poll. Part of what makes me concerned about the UNH poll is Ramaswamy at 8. We haven't seen Ramaswamy above 5 since the campaign began. And so that one may be a little too close. Look, the UNH poll, Trump has come down 3 points and Nikki has gone up 2 since the last poll UNH took. So the trend is the right trend if you're looking for a closing race. And I think both of those polls represent a narrowing of the field.
And Haley is up 12 since the November poll by UNH. Just to give people a sense of the field, by the way, we've been talking about the 2 front runners, if you will. It's Trump 39. In this case, as I mentioned, Haley 32. But then it's Christie 12, DeSantis 5. To Rick's point, Ramaswamy has 8 points in this poll. Rick, do you buy the logic that Chris Galderi was saying that it's actually good for Nikki Haley to keep Ron DeSantis in this race right now?
Yeah, I mean, everything is about the lanes, and when those lanes converge, those votes scatter. And Ron DeSantis, I totally agree with Chris. His vote's going to Trump. Christie's vote's going to Nikki. And when you look at head-to-heads that I've seen, it's a dead heat. And so, the ideal scenario is Christie gets out and Ron stays in, and that advantages Nikki Haley. But of course, none of that she can control. So she's just got to do the best she can in Iowa. And frankly, that may be the worst thing for her, because if she beats Ron DeSantis in Iowa, it could force him out of the race, and all those votes in New Hampshire go to Trump.
Find it interesting. DeSantis and Nikki Haley will debate tomorrow night in Des Moines. Jeannie, Ramaswamy did not qualify after all the time he spent in Iowa. Is that campaign done?
Not according to Ramaswamy. He has been out and so active. I think he went to all 99 counties twice, if I understand. So he says he's seeing this thing through, and he doesn't care about this CNN debate, is what he says.
Well, I guess not. We'll see how that goes with only 2 on the stage tomorrow night. Donald Trump won't be there. He's going to counter-program with the town hall on Fox. And so the wheel goes round. We're going to have a lot more with our panel coming up here, because the deal on Capitol Hill to avoid a government shutdown, the so-called deal, is now hitting the campaign trail. We'll have that next. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Lower a little change right now on the S&P 500 index, down 3 points. That is a drop now of less than 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 173, a decline of 0.5%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 36. That is a gain of 0.2%. 10-year 4.01% with a 2-year 4.36%. Spot gold little change now, down 49 cents the ounce to 2,027, while West Texas Intermediate crude is up 2.4%, 72.47 a barrel. Stocks fluctuating after a tech-led bounce as Treasury 10-year yields remain above 4%. CrowdStrike shares higher after being upgraded at Morgan Stanley, which sees a better demand outlook for the software firm services. CrowdStrike up by 5.6%. And GoDaddy higher after Piper upgraded the web platform firm. GoDaddy up now by 1.1%. Again, recapping, stocks are trading mixed. The Dow, the S&P, they're lower. NASDAQ higher. S&P down now by 4 points. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
So much for avoiding a government shutdown. We'll see. There are 8 legislative days to make it happen, and I'll let everyone know we're going to talk to Congressman Brian Stile coming up at the top of the hour, about 40 minutes from now. The Republican from Wisconsin is in the middle of all this as House members return to Washington today with 8 legislative sessions to figure out the path forward here. This, of course, would be funding the government, and we've got the staggered or laddered CR in effect now. So the first 4 bills will expire toward the end of this month and the rest at the beginning of February. We do not have a lot of time to play with, but there was a big deal around this time yesterday, as I told you. Big agreement on top-line spending levels, an agreement between Chuck Schumer and Speaker Mike Johnson, the same exact agreement, or as Jack Fitzpatrick called it, re-agreement, that Kevin McCarthy made with Joe Biden back in June. Now, some say this is progress. Help to avoid a shutdown. Helps the odds. But if you're Ron DeSantis, no way. The governor of Florida, of course, Republican presidential candidate, weighing in. He took video from an interview, wrote around it with a nice post on Twitter to let everybody know this is just top-line spending levels now. This is not the budget. That you're not even real Republicans.
This is just selling out everything that they ran on in 2022. You know, they said that they were going to change the way Washington operates. They said that they were going to hold these agencies accountable. You know, that's the thing. The House of Representatives is supposed to, because they're armed with the power of the purse, be the people's redress for when government misbehaves.
Did you get that? I don't know what Donald Trump is going to say about this either. He's talking to Speaker Mike Johnson, they say, on an almost daily basis. Let's reassemble the panel for their take. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors, are with us here. Rick, it's an opportunity for candidates, I guess, to make some news if you're on the trail. But what does it mean for the debate here in Washington?
Yeah, look, I think that it scrambles the deck a little bit. The reality is that Ron DeSantis has been a fading star for months. He's trying to find some mojo for his campaign in Iowa at the very last minute. And there probably aren't a lot of House members wondering what his opinions are on their legislative issues. So he's kind of doing this for his own self-interest, his own campaign interests in Iowa, not to actually influence anything in the House of Representatives. And I'm sure the House of Representatives look at it exactly the same way.
Well, he's certainly sounding a lot like Representative Chip Roy, who's endorsed Ron DeSantis. Jeannie has been traveling with him in Iowa, and he has said the same thing. Close the border or close the government. It's one or the other. Will other candidates weigh in on this?
Yeah, and here we're seeing exactly what we fear. I mean, yesterday we were kind of optimistic that maybe they could get this thing done in 8 days now. But as the clash of 24 and the budget process come together, it makes it all that much more difficult. And of course, Ron DeSantis is one thing, but to your point, when Donald Trump weighs in and he has already started talking about the fact he doesn't want to be Herbert Hoover, so let's just get this economic downturn done right now. I mean, this is where we are headed. And I think this is very, very difficult for somebody like Ron Johnson. I feel like reminding Ron DeSantis, if he wants Republicans to control DC, they've got to win elections. Right now, Democrats control the Senate and the White House. And so you got to deal with them. And, Ron DeSantis seems not to want to acknowledge that. And of course, Donald Trump doesn't either.
The Hoover thing. Who's Donald Trump? And did somebody buy him a book that there's like maybe an American history book we had the Civil War last weekend. Now this, I don't know. I wonder if Nikki Haley will take a stand on it. She was asked a lot of questions last evening on Fox. Rick, it was a town hall. They're each getting their turn here. And Bret Baier, I thought it was pretty interesting because it's an issue that we don't hear anything about. We talk a lot about Donald Trump. We talk a little bit about the border, talk a little bit about the economy. We never talk about the big stuff that could, in fact, supersede all of these issues like Social Security and Medicare. If you want to have a budget debate, let's talk about that. And I have to admit, it was not lost on me when I heard our own interview be invoked here. We talked to Nikki Haley back the end of August, and that was my question for her at the time. It came up in that town hall meeting on Fox last evening. Just a taste here from Bret Baier as he's talking to Nikki Haley.
So Governor DeSantis is hitting you for claiming the retirement age is, quote, way, way too low. He said, quote, I don't know why she's saying that. So are you saying that? Where do you stand?
I have never once said that.
Well, wait. In Bloomberg interview.
Oh, yeah, that Bloomberg interview. Did you not say that? Let's spin back the tape. Again, to the 24th of August, when Nikki Haley joined us here on Bloomberg. It was on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. Remember?
We don't touch anyone's retirement or anyone who's been promised in, but we go to people like my kids in their 20s when they're coming into the system and we say the rules have changed. We change retirement age to reflect life expectancy. Instead of cost of living increases, we do it based on inflation. We limit the benefits on the wealthy, and we expand Medicare Advantage plans.
What's the right age there then, Ambassador?
Well, I think we have to do the numbers. We've got to figure out what it is. But what we do know is 65 is way too low, and we need to increase that. We need to do it according to life expectancy.
65 is way too low, and we need to increase that. I guess Bret Baier was onto something. We appreciate their watching and listening, by the way, and I wonder what the panel thinks about this. Rick, this is not something that's resonating on the campaign trail. How come we're not talking about it outside of these brief moments?
You know, I think Republicans and Democrats alike have gotten so afraid of mentioning entitlement programs that it never comes up. I mean, wasn't that long ago when John McCain ran commercials in New Hampshire? Part of the run-up to his victory in a comeback campaign was all about solving Social Security problems. And so now it's like lockbox is back. You can't touch it. You can't talk about it. So, look, as you point out very responsibly, when you don't talk about entitlement reform, you're not talking about really changing government, and you're just nibbling around on the edges. And until we find a leader who's not afraid of tackling the hard stuff, we're stuck in that lockbox.
I guess that's right. I think he's talking about Al Gore, Jeannie. Are Democrats going to be the ones to open the lockbox?
You know, I am so proud of Bret Baier for listening to you, Joe, and listening to Bloomberg. And you know who else I think is going to listen is Donald Trump, because as Nikki Haley closes these polls, he will pull out that Bloomberg quote and throw it right back at her. This is, like Rick Scott all over again. And I'll bet the Democrats as well, Joe Biden and the Democrats will hit her on this should she continue rising in the polls. Rick Davis is right. It is, the reality is, good economics on her part, bad politics. This is an absolute loser. This is why Rick Scott walked back from it. Nikki Haley now walking back from it, but you've got her on tape, Joe. So I think they're all going to be pulling that tape.
We'll see if they use it. I'd love to follow up on that conversation with her if the opportunity arises. We'll see you in Iowa, Madam Ambassador. Rick, no one knows New Hampshire politics better than you. What does Nikki Haley do, or Ron DeSantis for that matter, when they arrive that morning after or even that night of the Iowa caucuses? You've got a week to play with. What do you do at the time?
No, fundraising is over. So you've got to hit town hall after town hall, public event after public event. The good news is everybody's paying attention. As Chris said earlier, all the voters have tuned in. So walking into a cafe, going and doing a town hall, from what I'm hearing on the ground, her town halls are on fire. Her crowd size is double, tripled, and quadrupled. And she needs to keep that momentum up. And that means 6, 8 events a day, a lot of drop-ins. So she just needs to hope that the roads are clear, the skies are blue, and, she can work it hard all the way to Election Day.
Talking about the weather, we hit this for a minute, Jeannie, and you actually broke my heart a little bit because I could see the pain as we look at the forecast for Iowa. Do you know that they're canceling campaign events today because they're getting a foot of snow or something there? This might affect your packing plans.
It totally has, Joe. I've already been in touch with a friend of mine who's in Des Moines. She said it's freezing. It's going to get worse. I need to go out and get some more hats, gloves, I don't know, long johns. It's going to be cold. I'm not good with that, but it'll be fun.
Producer James is opening us every morning in our little show chat here with the forecast. I'm going to just look back. Daily Des Moines forecast. Monday, a high of -4 and a low of -13. That's not even with the wind chill. But we shall prevail. We're bringing the shows on the road, and we're going to join you from both Iowa and New Hampshire. 6 days to Des Moines, 2 weeks to Manchester. And more with our panel straight ahead after we check world and national news. Nancy Lyons has that covered for us in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. Prosecuting Donald Trump for trying to overturn the 2020 election raises questions about whether other past presidents could have been criminally charged over official acts. That was the argument Trump's attorney made today before a federal appeals court panel. John Sauer is representing Trump.
Could George W. Bush be prosecuted for obstruction of an official proceeding for allegedly giving false information to Congress to induce the nation to go to war in Iraq under false pretenses? Could President Obama be potentially charged with murder for allegedly authorizing drone strikes targeting U.S. citizens located abroad?
Sauer's argument was countered, though, by James Pierce with the Department of Justice, who says a ruling against Trump would not result in unjustified tit-for-tat criminal charges against future presidents. There's now more evidence 2023 was the hottest year on record. We get more from Bloomberg's Nathan Hager.
The European Union's climate monitor says average global temperatures were 2.66 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the second half of the 19th century. That beat the previous record hot year of 2016. Every month last year, from June to December, blew past monthly temperature records, and scientists expect this year, 2024, will be even warmer than the last, thanks to the El Nino effect from hotter waters in the tropical Pacific. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Dangerous weather is making its way to the East Coast. This is Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn.
Heavy rain likely from northern Georgia into the Tennessee River Valley through the Appalachians. And we'll actually see heavy snow later tonight over northern New England. The other problem with the system is it's going to be producing some very, very high winds from the Gulf Coast and Texas all the way into the Northeast.
Again, Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long. Here at Bloomberg, we have got the Dow, the S&P both lower. NASDAQ holding on to a 2-point gain right now. Little changed, up less than 0.1%. NASDAQ 100 index up 9. That is a gain of just about 0.1%. Russell 2000 in the red, down 21, drop there of 1.1%. The Dow down 215, drop of 0.6%. S&P 500 down 11 now, a decline there of 0.2%. 10-year 4.01%, but the 2-year at 4.37%. Spot gold little changed, down 25 cents the ounce to 2027, while West Texas Intermediate crude is up 2.6%, 72.61 a barrel. Bitcoin right now down 1%, 46,642 on a Bitcoin. Economic data: America's trade deficit narrowed, and with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
It's a mixed bag. Imports remain elevated against a backdrop of resilient consumer spending, though they edged lower in November. Merchandise exports also dipped, reflecting weaker demand for autos, industrial supplies, and consumer goods. However, foreign demand increased in U.S. service industries based on the Commerce Department report. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Juniper Networks up now by 22.3%. Juniper is jumping the most in nearly 2 decades after the Wall Street Journal reported that the company is in advanced talks to be sold to Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. HPE down now by 7.9%. Again, recapping, stocks are lower. S&P now down 11, a drop there of 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
The Secretary of State is back in Tel Aviv today, back in Israel, as the headlines would suggest, for any number of reasons, to urge Israel to limit civilian casualties and even start a conversation about post-war, focusing on the country's relationships with Arab nations, part of ongoing efforts here in the U.S. to try to bring an end to the conflict, even as we support Israel in its war against Hamas. This has been quite a line for the Secretary of State to walk. As I mentioned, urging restraint, but at the same time, backing Israel and generating headlines in an address, a news conference he just held, generating news headlines on the terminal. When it comes to accusations of genocide, accusations against Israel, listen.
The charge of genocide is meritless. It's particularly galling, given that those who are attacking Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, as well as their supporter Iran, continue to openly call for the annihilation of Israel and the mass murder of Jews.
From a short time ago, let's reassemble the panel. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. What's your thought here, Rick, as the Secretary of State now makes, I believe it's 4 trips to Tel Aviv, trying to figure out what the next chapter is here? Is it time to have a post-war conversation? Is his timing right?
Yeah, I think that that's probably included in everything he's been doing over the last month. One, he's got to play defense like he did today on sort of the Palestinian PR machine, talking about genocide at the same time. The people that Israel's defending itself from are the ones promoting genocide. So, putting that in some kind of moral equivalency is really important for the lead negotiator for the United States. 2, keeping the coalition that supports Israel in the Middle East alive. Part of what he's been talking about is that the negotiations that set off potentially this entire conflagration were the peace talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has not walked away from that. Now, that's a good thing, because then Saudi will also have influence with Israel when it comes to what to do in Gaza. So he's formed a pretty good coalition of interested parties in the Middle East to try and keep the heat on, not just making this U.S. and Israel bilateral discussion. So doing the best he can to try and stop civilian deaths. I think that's a place the United States should be. but at the same time understanding that Israel has a strategy to get rid of Hamas, and Hamas would be better gone for the Palestinian people and the Israelis. So don't get in the way of that.
Jeannie, Anthony Blinken met with Benjamin Netanyahu, as you would expect on any of these visits, and he said after that he reiterated the need, this is a direct quote, to ensure lasting, sustainable peace for Israel and the region, including by the realization of a Palestinian state, unquote. Could that scenario involve a Benjamin Netanyahu?
Hard to imagine at this point. He has been pretty vocal against something like that. If we're going to talk about the future, you're going to have to talk about leadership in Gaza, and he can't close off doors to who those leaders may be. One thing I think is really important about Blinken's visit is he talks about the fact he met with MBS, that they are open to normalizing relations. And, one major question that arises is the effort to normalize is part of what many people see as the impetus to October 7. And I am really curious to what the administration says has changed vis-a-vis Iran as we think about normalization over there. If we believe that that was part and parcel of what prompted the attack on October 7th, this deplorable terrorist attack, what has changed and what is going to stop that from happening again? Because the threat, as Iran would see it, is even more apparent as these two get closer, these three, if you include the U.S. in this trilateral talks, gets closer to normalization. So I think it's something the administration is going to have to talk about as they think about post these incursions into Gaza.
Yeah, these are really hard questions. And it's not just Israel that the U.S. is working on. Rick, quite a headline this morning as we learn a secret meeting took place last month between the G7 nations and Ukraine, along with a small group of global South countries, to try to gin up support here for Kyiv's conditions for holding peace talks with Russia. This is a fascinating story to me as we now picture an administration that's trying to hasten the end of two wars at once that we are indirectly involved with. Do you think it's possible that the Biden White House can pull that off before the end of this year?
Well, I certainly think that this White House and any other previous White House certainly has the resources in place to manage more than one conflict at a time. So absolutely, this is well within their capacity. Two, I think the fact that they're keeping their eye on Ukraine while the fighting resumes in the Middle East is really important, because at the end of the day, probably the more vital to national interests of the United States conflict is what's going on in Europe right now. I mean, we have a shooting war in Europe that is on the threshold of entering its third year. And this is bad for us and our allies in NATO. And this is really bad for the people in Russia, who at some point you have to take into consideration there's a lot of suffering going on in Russia based on the really ridiculous strategy that Vladimir Putin has implemented, basically to throw one good man after another onto the fire in Ukraine. So at the end of the day, something's got to be done about this. I think that it's encouraging that you have as sophisticated an effort as to try and leverage the global South to try and get Putin to a place where you could have a legitimate conversation about cessation of hostilities.
Jeannie, the Biden administration is trying to wrestle inflation to the ground before the election. Will it be able to wrestle these two conflicts to an end in that same time frame?
It really would be an uphill battle. I've always thought the key to negotiation with Russia was through China and India, and the global South is an important component of that conversation as well. So it's a good start, but an awfully long ways to go. And of course, they've got to be talking directly with President Zelensky about these plans and their NATO allies. And, really, they would need to wrap this up before the next winter, because you're hard-pressed to imagine how Europe gets through it.
Coming up on 3 years, guys. It's pretty remarkable. And all of this is taking place against the backdrop of a debate here in Washington that is so far headed nowhere on funding for both, yes, Ukraine and Israel. We'll get back to the campaign trail just for a quick spot with our panel next. Some final thoughts. This is Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Walt Disney says a new Star Wars movie, The Mandalorian and Grogu, will go into production in 2024, the first new picture from the franchise in more than 4 years. The film is based on characters from the Mandalorian TV series on Disney+. Tilray Brands diversification into the beer business paid off in the fiscal second quarter, even as the company is beginning to start planting vegetables and fruit to monetize some of the unneeded cannabis cultivation space that it has in Quebec. And with more on what's going on at Tilray, here's Bloomberg's Steve Rappaport.
Charlie, some alcohol companies went into cannabis to offset the drug's increasing cannibalization of alcohol among younger drinkers. Tilray has done the opposite, though, acquiring craft beer brands to offset cannabis woes, such as ongoing competition from the illicit market, low wholesale prices, and an oversaturated Canadian market. Net revenue from the company's alcohol businesses increased 117% to $47 million in the second quarter. The growth came after Tilray acquired 8 beer brands from Anheuser-Busch InBev last August, building on purchases of other craft beers and making it the 5th largest craft brewer in the U.S. Tilray CEO Irwin Simon told Bloomberg the company plans to make Shock Top, a Belgian-style beer, a national brand in the U.S. Other acquired brands include Blue Point Brewing and Breckenridge Brewery. Charlie?
And that's Steve Rappaport reporting. We've got Tilray shares down now by 8.8%. Those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
Coming to you live from Washington. Glad you're with us. Kaylee Lyons will join the conversation coming up in just 5 minutes, and an important conversation ahead as well with Congressman Brian Stile of Wisconsin. Like I said, it's about 5 minutes away, so stay with us after we update world and national news. Nancy Lyons has that for us now in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. With Donald Trump looking on, his attorney today told a 3-judge federal appeals court he could not be prosecuted under the Constitution for any actions he took while president. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman has more from Washington.
Trump lawyer John Sauer said every president would have to fear prosecution when his successor took office.
To authorize the prosecution of a president for his official acts would open a Pandora's box from which this nation may never recover.
Judge Florence Pan asked,
could a president sell military secrets? Could a president order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival?
If he were impeached and convicted first.
Justice Department lawyer James Pierce told the judges an effort to overturn the results of an election is surely an indictable offense. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been in Israel meeting with the president there and prime minister. He says he urged Israel to halt steps that undercut the Palestinians' ability to govern themselves. And while speaking with reporters, Blinken was also asked to weigh in on the South African genocide case filed against Israel.
We believe the submission against Israel to the International Court of Justice distracts the world from all of these important efforts. And moreover, the charge of genocide is meritless.
The UN World Court is set to begin hearing South Africa's case this Thursday. The White House is making some changes in the process for cabinet secretaries to inform the president when they may be unable to perform their duties. In a memo, the administration says the secretaries need to delegate authorities when a secretary is incapacitated and forward the information to the White House. This, of course, comes following last week's hospitalization of Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin that was kept secret from authorities for several days. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg. Now back to you, Joe.
Nancy, thanks. What was the old line from Groucho Marx? I don't want to belong to any club that would accept me as one of its members. Is that maybe how RFK Jr. feels this morning? You see this story? He bailed on his own birthday party. This is real. A birthday fundraiser gala, and they tend to do these things for candidates, organized in this case by the super PAC behind the RFK Jr. campaign. It's called American Values 2024. They promoted the big event, kicked out invitations, got everybody in a lather by featuring celeb guests who would attend, like Martin Sheen, Dionne Warwick. Even Mike Tyson was supposed to be there. Turns out none of them ever planned to attend. And apparently they don't support the candidate for that matter.
So now RFK Jr. is bowing out of his own birthday party with final thoughts from our panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. This is an individual who's actually registering in the polls and could be seen as a spoiler, some suggest here, for Joe Biden's potential re-election. Rick, you've put a couple campaign events together. Is this normal behavior to go out on a limb and start featuring guests who don't even support you?
Well, you hope that he's blaming the super PAC and that he and his campaign weren't involved in the charade of trying to con people into coming to his birthday and spend money on his campaign just because he had these super duper people coming. So let's hope this is just another example of aggressive super PAC fundraising.
You see this, Jeannie? Andrea Bocelli was supposed to be there, was going to sing happy birthday. Turns out he's not even in the country on that day.
Yeah, and that's a bad burn for RFK Jr. because, of course, he sang, and I know this, Joe, at 2 Kardashian weddings. So if you can't get him to your birthday party, RFK Jr., you've got problems. And Dionne Warwick on Twitter was very funny. She said, if you're going to lie about me, lie about something cool, before she said she's not attending either.
Somebody cue the Curb Your Enthusiasm music. Great conversation as always. That's why they're our signature panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Hour 2 of Sound On starts right now.
Now, from our nation's capital, this is Bloomberg Sound On.
2 major stories that we're following here developing before our eyes.
What does it say about Trump's influence on the Republican Party?
What can the Biden administration do on its own to support Israel?
Bloomberg Sound On. Politics, policy, and perspective from D.C.'s top names.
The Republican caucus is at war with itself.
Members of Congress would have a press conference every day if somebody would cover them.
There is bipartisan support for Israel.
This is one of the big ones we only see once every decade or 2 decades in the Middle East.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
They're back. The House returning to the Capitol today after the winter break with only days to avoid a government shutdown. Welcome to Hour 2 of Sound On. With hopes also dimming now for a deal on the border, at least this week, we'll discuss with Congressman Brian Stile, the Republican from Wisconsin, serves on the Financial Services Committee and chairs the Administration Committee. Will bring us inside negotiations in the House. We'll also talk shutdown politics with Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence, where they're running odds on a potential interruption here. And we'll get an update on the investigation into Boeing after that gaping hole blew open. The 737 MAX in flight. That's all ahead after a look at Wall Street. We'll start there with Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hello there. We are looking at a mixed day. You mentioned Boeing. That stock trading lower now by about 0.8%, down again today. S&P lower, little change, down 3 right now. Drop there of 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 151, a decline of 0.4%. Nasdaq though, in the Nasdaq 100 index heading in the other direction. Right now we have got Nasdaq, the composite index, up 0.2%. Nasdaq 100 up by 0.3%. 10-year now at 4.01% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.38%. Spot gold up 0.1%. 2,029 the ounce on spot gold. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.7%. 72.64 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin now down by 0.9%. 46,703 on Bitcoin. Keeping an eye on Juniper Networks, it is up the most in nearly 2 decades after the Wall Street Journal reported that the company is in advanced talks to be sold to Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Right now, we've got Juniper up by 22.3%. HPE is down 7.8%. Again, recapping, S&P down 2, drop there of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, we thank you. Welcome to Hour 2 of Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, alongside Kaylee Lines, who just walked in the room. It's good to see you because we're looking for some news here on the very same story that we were talking about around this time yesterday. Whether we can avoid a shutdown. The House is back today, which is why we're glad to bring you a conversation in a moment with Congressman Brian Stile. Although, I don't know, I get the sense that maybe he never leaves Washington. Is he one of those lawmakers? He's got a family. I know he goes home. Yeah. Either way, 8 legislative days to figure out I won't say the word stopgap, because Mike Johnson said he didn't want to do that.
He did, yes.
Said he wouldn't do that.
But will he have to?
What do you know?
Well, Senator John Thune, so this is in the other chamber. The Senate may be singing a different tune on this than those in the House, but he says lawmakers likely will need to pass a short-term stopgap to avoid a government shutdown.
Okay.
So exactly what Mike Johnson said he didn't want to do, and yet knowing you have to reconcile 4 different appropriations bills between the House and the Senate with potentially conservative policy writers, questions around the border as well, there might not be much of a choice in the matter.
You know who just got back from the border is the aforementioned Brian Stile. We should bring him in now. Kaylee, the congressman from Wisconsin, is with us. Of course, chair of the admin committee, serves on financial services, and a reliable voice here on Bloomberg. Congressman, it's good to see you. Welcome back to reality here. We've been defying odds and logic for weeks and weeks in the House. What do you think about this idea? If there's something like a deal in place, could your speaker get away with a continuing resolution? Would you support it?
Well, our best case scenario is not have to kick the can down the road, but shutting the federal government down benefits no one, hurts a lot of people, and at the end of the day, it costs more. And so I'd rather see us get to a deal. We've been allowing ourselves to kick the can down the road. That's not productive. Hopefully, we have a deal where we can actually fund this year's appropriations bills, because it's not only the top line amount of money, which is a cut to non-defense, non-veterans discretionary spending. That hasn't been done in about 6 years. But it's also the spending priorities that are in there. We're breaking away from the priorities that were loaded in during Democratic one-party control.
Well, be that as it may, Congressman, there are plenty of your colleagues who are not satisfied with the top line figures. It seems this House Freedom Caucus certainly isn't. How do you expect Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, to navigate this and keep his job while doing so?
Well, a lot of us would like to see the funding continue to go down. Unfortunately, we have a Democrat in the White House and a Democrat-run Senate that is going to continue to push back and push for higher spending levels. This is where the deal that was cut under the FRA is the numbers that are before us, and getting the overall spending package done. And again, it's not just the top line numbers, it's also the broader policies that are included in the spending bill. Those details have yet to come out. But if we take a full step back, we also have to recognize that we're only having this conversation over about 12.5% of the entire federal spending over the course of a given year.
That's right.
If we want to really hammer out the broader challenge that we're facing from a spending perspective, we need to look at the 75% of the spending that's on autopilot right now. And I'd love to see us take this moment and really move forward with the debt commission and really force us to have the adult conversation about where we're at from a fiscal perspective.
You know, it's funny with all the talk in Washington about aging politicians. We're not old enough to have that adult conversation. It feels like, Congressman, your heart would be warmed to know that we actually talked about Social Security and Medicare on this program last hour, and the point of the conversation was that no one will talk about it. It is the third rail. It's in the lockbox. But those are the cards that you're dealt right now. And as you look down the barrel here of a difficult negotiating session, it looks like there's another uprising on the right. The Freedom Caucus does not like it. And now Ron DeSantis, the governor and presidential candidate, is coming out against this agreement between the speaker and Chuck Schumer, the FRA deal. Will that have an impact on the result in the House?
I don't know that the presidential politics over the course of the next few weeks will have a significant impact on the negotiations that are going to take place on Capitol Hill. I think at the end of the day, a lot of people are frustrated with where we're at from a spending level. They take it out on the 12.5% of the budget that probably gets the most airtime. It's important that we cut that spending, which we're doing in this. We could have the debate about how far we need to cut it. I'd like to see it go further. But again, we're negotiating with Democrats in the White House and Democrats in the Senate, and shutting down the federal government at the end of the day is not a winning policy. At the end of the day, when every time that has been done, the end result is more spending rather than less spending. It's a path that at the end of the day doesn't lead you to the conservative goal that people are setting out to try to achieve.
And yet there are some members of the House who are currently saying shut down the border or shut down the government, no security, no funding, these kind of ideas, Congressman, that would suggest that if the House doesn't get what it wants in terms of border reform, they would like government funding, at least for a time, to cease. And you speak of negotiations that have to happen between the White House and the Senate. The White House and the Senate are already trying to iron out a border security deal as part of this supplemental funding request. Can you commit to voting for whatever agreement they come to in the name of bipartisan cooperation?
Well, I'm hopeful that we see some form of an agreement come out of these negotiations. I want to read it before I commit to it. But there's clearly a need to restructure and reform our border policies. This administration has been very aggressive from day one, where they stopped border wall construction to send a global signal that the U.S.-Mexico border is unsecure and individuals are able to cross it. We got to end the abuse of the parole system. We got to end catch and release, reinstate stay in Mexico, immediately restart border wall construction. And if we do that, we could get a significant handle on the border crisis that's playing out, that's impacting communities all across the United States, not just our nation's largest cities. It's impacting smaller communities like a city called Whitewater in Wisconsin, in my district, that has 14,000 people and now has roughly estimated by the chief of police, 1,000 migrants now living.
Where are they living?
All throughout the city. There was, there's housing that was available. Many of these individuals are living in reasonably unsafe living conditions. It's been a huge burden on the school district. Where over 300 students have entered the school district, and again, in this small town, need English as a second language. Some of the dialects some of the students speak, primarily from Nicaragua and Venezuela, don't match some of the Spanish language teachers in the broader area. It's a burden on the police department, and it's a huge challenge. And again, the challenge that we see on a lot of our larger media networks that focus in on our nation's largest cities, Chicago, New York, Denver, miss the fact that this is impacting every community in the United States, including smaller communities in Wisconsin, which is why my trip to the border, I think, was so relevant, is we got to change the policies that this administration continues to implement.
Let's just stick with that for 1 minute, because you mentioned parole, which, according to all reports, is the big sticking point here. If you manage to increase funding for security, tighten the definition of asylum, and get some of the other elements you're talking about without the parole reform, would that be something that could pass the House?
Well, all of these pieces interact together. And again, I want to be able to get to a spot where we can read the final negotiation. But reforming the parole system is really important here. And the reason for that is many individuals right now, there's a catch and release policy being pushed by this administration. So after 72 hours after entering the country illegally, a vast number of these individuals are released with a freedom of movement, with a date to appear in court, often 3 or 4 years out. So what we need to do is actually adjudicate these cases on the spot. And the abuse that's occurring is the overwhelming majority of these are not actually valid asylum claims. The challenge is the ability to process those under our current system is delayed often 3, 4, or more years, which exacerbates the problem.
Well, there is a certain chorus, at least in the House, that is saying H.R. 2 contains many of these policies, therefore H.R. 2 should be what passes, or something very, very similar to it. Yet we know that the H.R. 2 was actually dead on arrival in the Senate when you passed it months ago. Are you concerned that there won't be enough Republican members of the House that are willing to support not just a border deal, but potentially whatever funding agreement, be it a continuing resolution or actual appropriation bills, that once again it will be Democrats that carry this over the finish line, and that as a result, Speaker Johnson is going to be in jeopardy?
Well, in an incredibly narrow majority like we have right now, getting anything done is incredibly difficult. I think people are aware that Speaker Johnson has been dealt a difficult hand, and he's negotiating valiantly to try to bring the spending down and address the border crisis. I would have loved to have seen the Senate take H.R. 2 and put it on the floor and amend it as they see fit. What the Senate has really done is not allowed this to play out on the floor of the Senate so that people can see where their senators stand as it relates to really important policy provisions. I'd also mention, Kaylee, that the border crisis has gotten significantly worse over the past handful of months. And so the political dynamic in the Senate has changed. And I think that is causing a greater sense of urgency and an understanding that action has to be taken. It was just last month that 300,000 individuals illegally entered the United States of America. It's half the population of the city of Milwaukee coming in just a month. And so we're in a situation where this is untenable. people are becoming more aware of that, and maybe the political dynamic in the Senate is such that we're going to be able to actually get substantive border security across the line.
It sure has been seeming like it, Congressman, but Senator Langford sounded pretty downbeat when he left a briefing with some House members yesterday, and he was specifically concerned about being able to craft something that Democrats could also vote for, knowing that there's going to be an effort starting tomorrow to impeach the Homeland Security Secretary, who was actually at the table with James Langford and the other negotiators here. Is this the right time to be impeaching the secretary, knowing that he's, as Langford said, simply carrying out the policies of this administration?
So he's done a pretty abysmal job of enforcing border security. He's been less than honest before Congress when he came before us and said in his own words that the border was secure when we know that that is not true. And so I think applying pressure onto the secretary is really important here to get the enforcement of the laws around the books, to put pressure on the Biden administration to change course. And so we're going to have to continue to push on DHS to change the policies that they're implementing right now. But the one part that I think is relevant here is simply removing him doesn't solve the problem wholesale, because all it will do is allow a new individual to come in to continue to exacerbate the bad policies of the administration. It's why actually passing this from a legislative standpoint at the end of the day is so imperative.
Congressman, we could talk to you about the border and those who are enforcing or not its security all day, but there is actually something else I want to get your take on. Knowing you sit on financial services and this is an issue that you pay a lot of attention to, a spot Bitcoin ETF. Rumor has it the SEC could actually approve one or many for the first time ever by the end of the day tomorrow. Would that improve your view of the SEC under Gary Gensler as a regulator?
What so much of the broader crypto industry needs is actually simply rules of the road so they can operate, and continuing to allow the SEC and other agencies to create policy through enforcement is a really bad practice. So if we are in a position where we're actually allowing companies to be able to operate here in the United States rather than pushing them abroad to conduct their business, that's a step in the right direction. But broadly speaking, I think we'd be best served by having a set of rules in place that companies can then know that they're operating in the sandbox of regulatory safety so they can do the innovation and development here in the United States of America. Failure to do that will continue to push this development in countries outside the United States, which will have negative long-term consequences.
Well, while we're introducing new topics to our conversation here, Congressman, I have to ask you, as the chair of the admin committee, what your thoughts are, and I realize that you don't oversee the Pentagon, but your thoughts on this whole issue involving the whereabouts and the chain of command, the communication or lack thereof that has surrounded the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. We've not been able to get answers to any of our questions from the Pentagon here. There are a lot of folks wondering why days passed without anyone knowing that he had been admitted to the hospital. And I wonder, as chair of a House committee, if you have a plan, for instance, if you were incapacitated or sick, what happens when the chairman cannot attend work one day?
What played out at the Defense Department is incredibly concerning, in particular a period of time where we have the global challenges that we're facing. It's a clear indication there's a significant lack of communication between the Defense Department and the White House. And I think there needs to be significantly more transparency as to why this occurred. And on the House side, there's a simple chain of command. If the chairman wasn't there, the next in line would be in the position to be able to step up and operate. But the failure and the lack of communication between our leading defense, the chairman of defense, back with the White House is concerning. I think there needs to be a lot more transparency about what occurred and why it occurred.
Congressman, it's good to see you. Good luck in the debate, and we'd like to stay in touch with you as we learn more. Congressman Brian Stile of Wisconsin. Kaylee, we've got breaking news right now about Lloyd Austin.
The Pentagon chief, Lloyd Austin, was treated for prostate cancer. That was the treatment, the procedure he underwent on December 22nd. Those headlines, Joe, just crossing the Bloomberg terminal.
Fascinating. As we learn more about the condition here of Lloyd Austin, we'll bring you more as we learn it here live from Washington. Lloyd Austin treated for prostate cancer on the 22nd of December. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. Would you check markets all day long here at Bloomberg? Just getting word from BlackRock, job cuts. BlackRock is going to dismiss about 600 employees, roughly 3% of its global workforce, as it seeks to reallocate resources amid rapid changes in asset management. CEO Larry Fink saying in a memo to staff, quote, "We see our industry changing faster than at any time since the founding of BlackRock. BlackRock shares now lower by 0.5%. It is a mixed market, a mixed equity market, with the S&P 500 index down 7 points now, drop there of 0.1%. Stocks have been fluctuating after a tech-led bounce as Treasury 10-year yields remain above 4%. Oil is climbing. We've got the Dow down 193 right now, down 0.5%. S&P down 7, down 0.1%. NASDAQ, the composite index, up 23 points, up 0.2%. NASDAQ 100 index up 30, a gain there of 0.2%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares down now by 0.9%. 10-year yield 4.01% with a 2-year 4.37%. Gold little change now, up less than 0.1%. 2029 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.2%, 72.32 a barrel. Briefly, Starbucks plans to more than double its stores in India in 4 years, opening the equivalent of one new store every 3 days. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
With breaking news from Washington and specifically across the river at the Pentagon, where there have been a lot of questions about the Secretary of Defense, who of course was hospitalized. We talked about this quite a bit yesterday, hospitalized for days, and interruptions in the chain of command, or at least the chain of communication with the White House, because there were several days where no one knew exactly where Lloyd Austin was. It turned out the answer was Walter Reed, and Kaylee, we now know that he was hospitalized after surgery for prostate cancer.
Yep.
We just got a statement from Walter Reed that you just brought to us here. Somewhat excruciating in detail, but it really underscores how many questions were being asked yesterday.
Absolutely. So what we know is that the initial procedure to treat the prostate cancer happened on December 22nd. During that procedure, the Secretary of Defense was placed under general anesthesia. He returned to the hospital on January 1st due to complications from that procedure. There were a lot of very specific medical details as to what his condition was, the treatment that was required. But I think
he was in severe pain.
We knew he was in severe pain. I think the most important part, though, of this statement from Walter Reed says that during this stay, the stay that began January 1st, Secretary Austin never lost consciousness and never underwent general anesthesia. And Joe, that was one of our huge questions. Was the Defense Secretary essentially incapacitated without the knowledge of the White House or many in the Defense Department?
Apparently the answer to that is no, and a phone call could have been made, and eventually was to the deputy secretary who was on vacation in Puerto Rico. And as far as we know, she is still running the Pentagon at this moment, Kathleen Hicks.
As he remains hospitalized, to our knowledge. Now, the staff at Walter Reed does also say the infection he was experiencing has cleared. He is making progress. They anticipate a full recovery, although this can be a slow process. But again, Joe, to your point, the length of the statement, the detail that is provided just speaks to how much detail people were seeking, because there were so many questions around the secretary and his condition.
We talked around this time yesterday with Peter Martin, our reporter at the Pentagon, who had just returned from a briefing in which they tried to get all of these answers and received none of them. So there was clearly a conversation last night between the Pentagon Communications Office, the top brass, and Walter Reed. Let's get something out here officially. Interesting, though, to your point, it came from Walter Reed and not the Pentagon.
Well, and there's nothing in this. This is strictly medically what has happened to the secretary. This does not go into the detail of what other communication was or was not happening between the secretary and anyone else at this time other than the medical staff that was working with him.
Redhead on the terminal, Austin hospitalized after surgery for prostate cancer. We'll let you know more as we learn it, but a pretty major revelation today that clearly they knew about yesterday, but chose to disseminate this information on their own time and in their own way, Kaylee, which comes together with a number of stories that have kept us guessing here as lawmakers return to Washington. We just talked to Congressman Brian Stile. It's unclear if the government is going to shut down just a couple of days from now, with no real clear path on working out a budget.
Exactly. So that raises the continuing resolution question, a short-term stopgap measure that Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, did not want, but may have to pursue anyway, if you don't, that is, want to shut down the government.
I wonder if this changes the odds at BI. Bloomberg Intelligence, Nathan Dean is back. He's with us at the table here, constantly running odds on the issues that matter to terminal users. And last I checked, Nathan, it's good to see you. We were at about 70% when it came to a government shutdown. Has that moved?
No.
Even with the top line spending deal?
Even with the top line number, we're sticking with 70%. The reason being is that, look, the $1.66 trillion deal, that's great news. You need that number. That's good progress. But there are so many other things now that has to happen. You know, policy writers, policy goals, how does that money trickle down to other agencies and so forth? None of that has been figured out. So what we're saying right now is that for this January 19th deadline, we're still going with 70%. Now, look, don't be surprised if it gets kicked the can. There is going to be another continuing resolution. They're not going to come to an overall agreement before January 19th. But we're at a 70% chance of shutdown for the January 19th. We're at a 40% chance of a shutdown come February 2nd. And we're at a 20% chance of a shutdown or non-continue or during a continuing resolution before the April 30th.
Wow, okay. Those are a little different now.
Yeah.
We've got a few different scenarios.
Many moving parts that we're working with here, but that's by design. That's why they split this up into two in the first place. And as you've told us before, Nathan, the idea is the February 2nd one is the actual painful shutdown because it includes defense. That's going to be the one they want to avoid more so than the January 19th.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this shutdown was designed by Speaker Mike Johnson for breathing room. You know, if he were to go to the floor with this $1.66 trillion deal with none of the policy goals included and so forth, well, he's doing the same thing that Kevin McCarthy got kicked out of job for.
Yeah.
But if you have a short shutdown of this January 19th, and it's 4 out of the 12 appropriation bills, and apologies to the Department of Energy and Transportation and Agriculture, but that doesn't bring the political pressure up enough that Speaker Johnson has to make a deal. So that leaves him a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of negotiation space. But the February 2nd one, that's the one where the government will shut down, the scary headlines. But for the impact to the markets, scary headlines do not equate to scared markets. So we still think it's a minimal impact.
You mentioned policy riders, or poison pills, as Democrats might call them in this case. Will we see them? The Speaker hasn't ruled them out, and I'm guessing that has a bit to do with the odds you're running.
Well, look, I think you certainly got to try. You know, if you're not going to try, then, you know, it's almost like you're just saying, look, to your own party, I'm just going to accept it and move on. Yeah. So certainly we anticipate the Speaker to try. But for us, what we're tracking, the most important thing out of all the discussions in the government space is the Ukraine funding. Because for these defense contractors, not impacted by shutdowns, but if President Biden were to get the $40 to $43 billion that he's seeking, you're looking at a 1% to 2% increase in revenue sales over the next 1 to 2 years. Certainly something that defense contractor investors should keep in the back of their mind. So, but when it comes to all the other stuff like border security and so forth, it certainly goes into the equation of whether we're going to have a shutdown or not, but we're not seeing a ton of market impacts there.
Well, to your point about border security now being something of a linchpin in not just the supplemental Ukraine conversation, but just in the appropriations process in the first place, because many House conservatives have indicated they want to see their border policies pursued in order to keep the government open. How should that change the thinking around the likelihood that Ukraine aid ultimately gets through? Because if you don't have the leverage of tying a border security deal to that, if you have it in the appropriations process, doesn't that mean there's nothing really to get the House to support Ukraine aid?
That's it. I mean, it's all together. I mean, whether they like it or not, Ukraine, border security, Israel aid, it's all together. The reason being is that the funding deal, as you know, is a good point of leverage for the Republicans. They can essentially go to the White House and say, look, you want this, this, and this. Well, we want this, this, and this, and we're not going to hold it. We're not going to agree until you give us something you want. There is going to be a negotiation. Both sides are not going to get what they want, but both sides are going to get something that they want. And so, for us, we think that there's enough support to get a Ukraine deal. We'll see, obviously, what happens with border security. We saw statements from Senator Sinema yesterday that she was optimistic. Senator Langford said not this week. So, they're talking. But again, I was just mentioning senators, not the House.
Right.
So, whether or not the House accepts that or not, but what we are telling our clients is we think that some agreement will come together We do think that a long-term shutdown is sort of out of the equation at this point. If we go past February 2nd, the major impact is the data that's coming from the government, specifically for the Federal Reserve reports. There's some agricultural reports and so forth out there. But, you know, the big scary headline, if you will, is if we just keep continuing resolutioning until April 30th.
I'll tell you what, though, you have to consider the environment that we're going to be in.
Yeah.
In the middle of Iowa and New Hampshire with all that going on, that gets very noisy. It's not just going to be what happens in Washington that could potentially determine the outcome. Nathan, I have to ask you while you're here about rescheduling. The DEA confirming its review of marijuana's classification. We're watching pot stocks rise. I'm guessing your phone's ringing.
Yeah, so last week there was a letter that the DEA sent to a couple of folks up in Congress essentially stating that we're looking at reschedulization. That's it. We're just looking. We're not doing it. But, you know, a lot of the pot stocks jumped up about 10 to 15%, and they stayed there until this morning. We actually saw them decrease and go back to par this morning. But when it comes to reschedulization, there's a couple of things. One, we think there's a 70% chance that reschedulization from Schedule 1 to from Schedule 3 to Schedule 1 goes this year. What that does is it brings tax relief to a lot of the marijuana companies. And their effective tax rate goes from about 25% down to around 5%.
And you think it's going to happen this year?
Yeah, we do think that there's going to be, because this is up to the DEA administrator, and we think the politics that are playing here during an election year, we're actually somewhat positive on that.
So more likely they get what they want on taxes, not necessarily on access to the banking system.
That's exactly it. I mean, you know, and we do have a lot of, you know, investors who disagree with me on this, so I may be, you know, out of consensus here, but we don't think reschedulization is all that big of a deal because it doesn't bring legalization.
Right.
Legalization brings interstate commerce, and so the industry itself can't really expand until you get that full legalization. And we're at 20% chance of that happening before 2026.
20%. I love it. It's like
all the odds.
Our own consultant here, Nathan Dean. We are his
Dad.
client, known to some.